They found her standing over death itself, rifle steady, eyes wild with survival. In 1878, Montana, two cowboys tracked a vanished wagon train through scorched wilderness, expecting corpses, finding something far more dangerous: hope. Caleb Monroe, a man who'd sworn off attachment after tragedy carved out his heart, discovered Elena Ward alone in the mountains, guarding her life with nothing but willpower and gunpowder. The wagon train was gone. She remained. What began as a rescue became something neither could control, a collision of two souls who'd survived by refusing to need anyone, now facing the one thing more terrifying than death: connection. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment your city below so I can see how far this story travels across the world. The land looked like God had taken a torch to it and walked away. Caleb Monroe urged his sorrel mare forward, squinting against the bleached-out sky that hung over the Montana territory like a dirty sheet. August heat shimmered off the valley floor in waves, turning distant ridges into liquid mirages that dissolved when you looked at them straight. Beside him, Marcus Webb, older by 15 years, grayer by experience, rode with the patient stillness of a man who'd long ago made peace with disappointment. "Nothing out here but bones," Marcus said, not for the first time. His voice carried the dry rasp of too much dust, too many seasons doing exactly this kind of fool's errand. 3 weeks since anyone saw that train. You know what that means. Caleb knew. Everyone knew. The Hardesty wagon train, 19 families, 60-some souls, had pushed west from Fort Benton in late July, chasing the promise of timberland and fresh starts. They'd sent word from their first camp, their second, then nothing. The silence that followed had weight to it, the kind that settled in your gut and stayed there. "We search until we don't," Caleb said flatly. "That's the job." Marcus glanced at him, something like concern flickering across weathered features. "You've been doing this work 2 years now, Monroe. Haven't seen you crack a smile in any of them. Man's got to find something worth living for besides duty." "Duty's enough." "Is it?" Caleb didn't answer. He'd learned that silence served better than explanation. People wanted stories, context, the soft corners of understanding, but stories required you to revisit what you'd spent years trying to bury. Better to be the quiet one, the reliable hand, the cowboy who showed up, did the work, and rode out again without leaving impressions behind. They'd been tracking the wagon train's supposed route for 6 days now, following a thread of information so thin it barely qualified as evidence. A trapper had seen wagon ruts heading northwest toward the Bitterroot Range. A Salish hunter reported dust clouds near Flint Creek. A rancher swore he'd heard gunfire echoing through the canyons 2 weeks back, though he couldn't say if it was settlers or hunters or his own imagination ricocheting off granite walls. Marcus pulled up at a rocky overlook, letting his gelding blow. Below them, a creek cut through a shallow valley, its banks lined with cottonwoods that somehow still held green despite the drought. Life persisted in strange pockets out here. You just had to know where to look. "We'll water the horses," Marcus decided. "Make camp if the light fails before we clear the valley." Caleb nodded, already scanning the terrain with the mechanical precision that had kept him breathing through harder country than this. Eyes moving in quadrants, ridgeline for movement, middle distance for color breaks, foreground for tracks. It was a rhythm now, automatic as breathing. That's when he saw them. Footprints. Not animal tracks, human prints crossing the sandy bank near a cluster of willows about 200 yards downstream. Fresh enough that the edges hadn't crumbled, deep enough to suggest weight, purpose. "Marcus?" His voice came out sharper than intended. The older man followed his gaze, then swore softly. "Could be hunters." "Could be." They descended in silence, caution overriding hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope made you careless, made you want things so badly you stopped seeing straight. Caleb had learned to strangle hope before it could take root, because hope, in his experience, was just another name for the thing that killed you when you least expected it. The tracks led upstream, paralleling the water. Boot prints, definitely. Smaller than a man's, which meant either a young boy or a woman. Single set, no companions. Whoever made them had been moving with purpose, but not panic. The stride was even, measured. "Fresh," Marcus observed, kneeling to examine the clearest print. Hours old, maybe. Dawn, if I'm reading it right. Caleb's pulse kicked up despite himself. One person. Looks like. From the wagon train, Marcus stood slowly, brushing dirt from his hands. Long way from where they should have been, but stranger things have happened. They followed the tracks on foot, leading the horses, moving with the careful quiet of men who'd learned that noise carried in ways you couldn't predict. The creek babbled over stones, masking their approach. Overhead, a hawk circled, riding thermals with effortless grace. The tracks veered away from the water, cutting toward a dense thicket of serviceberry and choke cherry bushes that formed a natural screen against the hillside. Caleb's instincts prickled. Good defensive position, water nearby, visibility in multiple directions, cover from above. He heard it before he saw anything, the metallic click of a rifle being cocked. That's close enough. The voice came from the shadows, female, young, steady as bedrock. Not a question, not a plea, a statement of absolute fact delivered with the kind of calm that only comes from being beyond fear, past negotiation, operating purely on will. Caleb froze mid-step. Marcus did the same, both of them raising their hands slowly, carefully, in the universal language of "we mean no harm." "We're just looking for people," Marcus called out, his tone gentle but carrying. "The Hardesty wagon train. We were sent from Fort Ellis to find them." Silence. Then, "You're too late." The words landed like stones in still water. Caleb felt something twist in his chest, that ugly confirmation that hope had been foolish all along, that death had been patient and thorough in its work. "Are you hurt?" he asked, surprised by the steadiness in his own voice. Another pause. "Why would you care?" Fair question. Out here, caring was expensive. Caring got you killed or worse, got you attached to things that could be taken away. Caleb understood that arithmetic perfectly. "Because we rode 6 days to find you," he said simply. "Seems wasteful not to finish the job." A beat of consideration. Then she stepped out of the shadows, and Caleb forgot how to breathe properly. She was young, early 20s maybe, with dark hair braided back from a face that might have been beautiful if it wasn't so hollowed out by exhaustion and sun damage. Her dress was torn at the hem, stained with dirt and something darker that might have been blood. But it was her eyes that stopped him, gray-blue, sharp as flint, burning with the kind of intensity that came from staring down oblivion and refusing to blink. The rifle in her hands never wavered. Winchester repeater, well-maintained despite everything. Her finger rested on the trigger guard, ready but not actively threatening. Professional distance. "Elena Ward," she said, like she was reporting weather. "I was with the Hardesty train. The rest—" She paused, something flickering across her expression too fast to name. "The rest are gone." Marcus stepped forward slowly, hands still visible. "Gone how?" Rockslide took 3 wagons in the first week. Mountain Fever took another dozen after that. The ones who were left decided to split up. Some went back, some pushed on toward the Bitterroot Valley. I stayed because— She stopped, jaw tightening. "Because there wasn't anywhere else to go." "Alone?" Caleb heard himself ask. "For how long?" 2 weeks. Maybe longer. Lost track after the first few days. 2 weeks. Alone in this country with nothing but a rifle and whatever supplies she could carry. Most men wouldn't last that long. Hell, most men wouldn't try. "You got shelter?" Marcus was already shifting into practical mode, assessing needs like inventory. "Food? Water's here, but I've got a camp." Elena lowered the rifle slightly, though not entirely. Trust apparently was still provisional. "Back in the rocks, it's defensible." "Smart," Caleb said, and meant it. She looked at him then, really looked, like she was reading a language written on his face. Whatever she found there must have satisfied something, because her shoulders dropped half an inch, the first sign of tension releasing. "You said you were sent from Fort Ellis. That mean you're military?" "Civilian scouts," Marcus clarified. "Army contracts us when they need men who know the territory. We find lost folks, track movements, report back. You want us to take you to the fort?" Elena's expression shuddered immediately. "No? No? I'm not going back." Her voice carried an edge now, something absolute. Not to explain how everyone died while I lived. Not to be some charity case washing laundry in exchange for pity meals. I came west for land and a future, and that's what I'm still after. Caleb understood that defiance. Recognized it like seeing his own reflection in dark water. She wasn't broken by what she'd survived. She was forged by it. There was a difference, and most people never learn to see it. Fair enough, he said before Marcus could argue. But you can't stay here. Winter comes early in the mountains, and when it does, this creek'll freeze solid. You'll starve or freeze, probably both. I'll move when I need to. Where? Somewhere. The word hung in the air, vast, impossible, desperate. Somewhere. The dream of every person who'd ever pointed themselves west and started walking. Somewhere better, somewhere new, somewhere that didn't carry the weight of everything they'd lost. Marcus sighed, the sound of a man recognizing a battle he couldn't win. At least let us see your camp. Make sure you're set up proper. We can leave you supplies. I don't need charity. It's not charity if we're getting paid to find survivors, Caleb interjected smoothly. Contract says we render aid to anyone from the wagon train still breathing. You're still breathing. Let us do our job. Elena studied him for a long moment, weighing something internal. Finally, she nodded once. This way. She turned and moved through the brush with the silent efficiency of someone who'd learned to navigate this landscape through necessity. Caleb and Marcus followed, leading their horses single file through the narrow game trail she'd been using. Her camp was exactly what he'd expected. Minimal, functional, ruthlessly organized. A lean-to constructed from salvaged canvas and fallen timber, angled to deflect wind and rain. A fire pit ringed with stones, cold now but showing signs of recent use. Supplies arranged in neat lines, canned goods, dried meat wrapped in cloth, a single battered pot hanging from a branch. You built this yourself? Marcus asked, genuine admiration coloring his tone. Had help at first. A man from the train, Samuel Garrett, stayed with me for 3 days after the others left. Helped me get set up before he headed back east. Her voice flattened on the name, and Caleb caught the implication. One more person who'd walked out of her life, leaving her smaller and more alone. You've done well, he said, and meant it without qualification. She glanced at him, surprise flickering briefly. You don't have to patronize me. I'm not. Most people would have died in the first week. You're still here. That's worth acknowledging. Elena's expression softened just slightly. Not quite a smile, but something in the neighborhood of one. Well, I'm stubborn. Stubborn's useful, Marcus agreed, already unsaddling his gelding. Mind if we make camp nearby tonight? Light's failing, and I'd rather not navigate that valley in the dark. She hesitated, then nodded. Long as you stay downwind of my supplies, don't want your horses spooking and trampling everything. Deal. They set up camp with the smooth efficiency of men who'd done this 1,000 times. Horses picketed and watered, bedrolls laid out, coffee started over a small fire. Elena watched them work with guarded curiosity, still keeping that careful distance. When Marcus offered her fresh coffee, she accepted with visible relief, wrapping both hands around the tin cup like it was precious metal. When's the last time you talked to someone? Caleb asked, not looking at her directly. Sometimes questions landed easier when you weren't making them confrontational. 2 weeks, give or take. That's a long silence. I got used to it. She sipped the coffee, eyes closing briefly in appreciation. You get used to most things, turns out. The quiet, the waiting, the not knowing if today's the day something goes wrong that you can't fix. Marcus settled onto his bedroll with a grunt. What made you stay? After everyone else left, I mean. Most folks would have picked a direction and started walking. Elena was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight that suggested she'd asked herself the same question many times. Because running back felt like admitting defeat, and pushing forward alone felt like suicide, so I stayed. Figured if I could last until someone came looking, I'd have earned the right to decide what comes next. She looked up, meeting Caleb's eyes directly. You found me, so I guess I earned it. Earned what? Marcus asked. A choice. The words settled over them like ash. A choice. The thing everyone craved and almost no one actually got. Especially out here, where the land made most decisions for you. Caleb felt something shift in his chest, a hairline crack in the foundation he'd spent 2 years building. He recognized her because he was her. Someone who'd survived by refusing to let the world decide their ending. Someone who carried loss like a stone in their pocket, familiar weight that never got lighter, but at least became predictable. "What choice are you after?" he heard himself ask. Elena looked at him, and in her eyes he saw the same question reflected back. "Who are you really? What do you want?" "Haven't decided yet," she said finally. "But I'll know it when I see it." They talked late into the night, carefully at first, then with increasing ease as exhaustion lowered everyone's defenses. Marcus told stories about his years scouting for the army, battles fought, and disasters narrowly avoided. Elena described the wagon train's journey west, the families she'd traveled with, the hopes they'd all carried like fragile cargo. Caleb mostly listened, contributing only when directly asked. He'd learned that silence made you invisible. People talked around you, near you, but rarely at you if you stayed quiet enough. It was safer that way. But Elena kept looking at him, like she was trying to solve an equation that didn't quite balance. "You don't say much," she observed, not unkindly. "Words are expensive. So spend them carefully?" "Something like that." She smiled then, small but genuine. "I like that. Most people talk just to fill space. You talk when it matters." Marcus chuckled from his bedroll. "Don't encourage him. Man's already halfway to becoming a monk." "Nothing wrong with monks," Elena said lightly. "They know the value of quiet." Caleb found himself almost smiling, which was dangerous. Smiling led to laughing. Laughing led to connection. Connection led to caring, and caring, well. Caring was the fast track to getting your heart carved out and fed to wolves. He stood abruptly. "I'll check the horses." He walked away from the firelight, letting darkness swallow him. The horses were fine, content and drowsy, unbothered by his presence. He stood there anyway, breathing night air that tasted like pine and stone, trying to settle the restless thing that had woken up in his chest. Behind him, he could hear Marcus and Elena still talking, voices low and comfortable. Normal people doing normal things, building rapport, finding common ground, establishing the small intimacies that turned strangers into allies. Caleb had forgotten how to do that. Or maybe he'd never known. "You all right?" He turned to find Elena standing a few feet away, arms crossed against the cooling air. She'd approached silently, good skill in this country. "Fine," he said automatically. "Liar." The word was soft, without judgment, just observation. He almost smiled again. "What gave me away?" "The way you look at people, like you're watching from behind glass, present but separated." She moved closer, not touching but near enough that he could feel her warmth. "I recognize it because I do the same thing." Caleb felt something in his chest constrict. "Why?" "Because connection hurts. Because everyone leaves, one way or another. Because it's easier to stay distant than to lose someone else." She paused, eyes finding his in the darkness. "Am I close?" "Too close. Dangerously close." "What happened to you?" he asked, the question escaping before he could stop it. Elena looked away, jaw tightening. "Parents died when I was 16, cholera. Had a brother, older, looked after me for a while. Then he signed up with the army, went west, and I never saw him again. No letters, no word, just gone. So I came west too looking for him. Joined the wagon train, figured I'd find him in the territory somewhere." She laughed, bitter and small. "Haven't found him yet, but I found everything else there is to lose." "I'm sorry." "Don't be. I'm still breathing. That's more than most can say." She was right. Survival was currency out here, the only thing that mattered when everything else got stripped away. "What about you?" she asked. "What are you running from?" Caleb considered lying, considered silence. But something about her directness, her unflinching way of looking at hard truths, made deflection feel cowardly. "Had a wife," he said quietly. "Sarah. Married young, built a homestead in Kansas. Good land, good water, Good life. He paused, the next words requiring physical effort to produce. Comanche raid, winter of 75. I was in town getting supplies. By the time I got back, he didn't finish. Didn't need to. Elena didn't offer platitudes or sympathy. She just nodded, acknowledging the weight of what he'd said without trying to diminish it with empty words. So you became someone who doesn't stay anywhere long enough to lose it again, she said. Yes. Does it work? Usually. But not tonight. Caleb looked at her, really looked, seen past the surface to the stubborn, brilliant, wounded thing underneath. She was dangerous. She was exactly the kind of person who could make him forget why distance mattered. No, he admitted. Not tonight. Elena held his gaze for a long moment, something passing between them that had no name but carried weight nonetheless. Then she smiled, small, sad, understanding. We're a mess, aren't we? Completely. Good. At least we're honest about it. She turned and walked back toward the fire, leaving him standing in darkness with his defenses in pieces around his feet. Caleb stayed there a long time, listening to the night sounds, wind in the trees, creek water over stones, the quiet breathing of horses. Trying to rebuild the walls she'd somehow walked straight through without even trying. It didn't work. Morning came cold and clear, frost glittering on the grass like scattered diamonds. Caleb woke to the smell of coffee and frying bacon. Marcus, already up and moving, ever the early riser. Elena emerged from her lean-to looking more rested than she had the night before, though the shadows under her eyes suggested sleep was still a luxury she couldn't quite afford. Morning, she said, accepting coffee from Marcus with visible gratitude. Morning. Sleep all right? Better than I have in weeks. Having people nearby makes a difference, I guess. They ate in comfortable silence, the kind that suggested familiarity rather than awkwardness. Caleb found himself studying Elena when she wasn't looking, the way she moved with economical precision, the way her eyes constantly scanned the surrounding terrain even while sitting still. Survival had become reflex for her, same as him. We should talk about what happens next, Marcus said eventually, setting down his empty plate. Elena's expression shuddered immediately. I told you. I know. You're not going back. But you also can't stay here indefinitely. So what's the plan? There's a settlement starting up near Missoula, Elena said slowly, like she was testing the idea aloud. Heard about it from one of the families before we split up. They need teachers, someone to work with the children, help establish a school. I've got education, I can read, write, do arithmetic. That's worth something. Missoula's 3 weeks' travel from here, Caleb pointed out. Hard country between here and there. You'd need supplies, a horse, someone who knows the routes. I know. You planning to walk it alone? Elena's jaw set in that stubborn line he was beginning to recognize. If I have to. Marcus and Caleb exchanged a look, a full conversation happening in silence, the kind only possible between men who'd worked together long enough to develop shorthand. We could guide her, Marcus said finally. Contract doesn't specify we have to bring survivors back to the fort, just that we find them and render aid. Getting her to Missoula counts as aid. Caleb felt his pulse kick up. Dangerous territory. Spending 3 weeks traveling with her, watching her navigate the world with that fierce determination, seeing her face across a campfire every night, that was asking for trouble. That was asking to care. But the alternative was watching her walk into the wilderness alone, knowing the odds were stacked against her, carrying that knowledge like lead in his chest for however long he lived after. It's not safe, he said, aware he was arguing against his own interests. We'd be responsible for her. I don't need you to be responsible for me, Elena interjected sharply. I need a guide. Someone who knows the trails. I can pay. I've got money saved, jewelry I can trade. This is a business arrangement, not a rescue. Pride. He understood pride, recognized it as the thing that kept you upright when gravity and grief were both pulling you down. All right, Caleb heard himself say. Business arrangement. We guide you to Missoula, you pay what you can afford, everyone walks away whole. Elena looked at him, surprise flickering across her features. Just like that? Just like that, Why? Good question. Caleb didn't have a good answer, at least not one he was willing to say aloud. Because she reminded him of everything he'd tried to forget? Because her stubborn refusal to quit made something in his chest ache with recognition? Because he'd already spent one night lying awake thinking about her, which meant the damage was done anyway? Because it's the right thing to do, he said simply. Marcus snorted. Since when do you care about right and wrong? Since about 5 minutes ago. You got a problem with that? Nope. Just making sure I'm traveling with the same Monroe I know. But Marcus was smiling slightly, which meant he approved even if he wouldn't say it directly. Elena looked between them, something like hope lighting her expression for the first time. When can we leave? Day after tomorrow, Marcus decided. That gives us time to prepare proper, buy supplies in the nearest town, make sure the horses are sound for the journey. You got objections to that timeline? None at all. They spent the rest of that day and the next in preparation, breaking down Elena's camp, inventorying supplies, riding to a small trading post 15 miles south to stock up on provisions. Elena proved herself useful at every turn, helping pack gear, assessing food stores, negotiating with the trader in a way that suggested she'd done this before. Caleb found himself watching her more than was strictly professional. The way she frowned when concentrating, the way she laughed at Marcus's stories, the sound bright and unexpected like coins falling on stone. The way she moved through the world with purpose despite having every reason to give up. They camped one final night near the creek before starting the journey proper. The temperature had dropped, autumn announcing itself in the clear air and changing light. Elena sat close to the fire, wrapped in a wool blanket, staring into the flames. You scared? Caleb asked quietly, sitting down beside her. She considered the question seriously. Yes, but I've been scared before. Hasn't killed me yet. There's scared, and then there's smart scared. Knowing what could go wrong and respecting it. Which one am I? Smart scared. You're not reckless. You're just determined. Elena smiled slightly. Is that a compliment? It's an observation. You're good at those. Observing, watching, seeing things other people miss. She looked at him directly, firelight catching in her eyes. What do you see when you look at me? Dangerous question. Honest answer would be someone I could care about if I let myself. Someone who makes me remember what it felt like to want more than survival. Someone who's going to make it, he said instead. Whatever happens, wherever you end up, you're going to make it. You sound certain. I am. Why? Because quitting isn't in you. I can see it. You'll bend before you break, and even then, you'll find a way to keep going. Elena was quiet for a long moment, something working behind her eyes. When she spoke, her voice carried weight. My whole life, people have either underestimated me or expected me to fail. No one's ever just believed in me without qualification. She paused. Thank you for that. Caleb felt something crack open in his chest. That dangerous, foolish thing that he'd worked so hard to keep buried. Connection, care, the beginning of something that could destroy him if he let it. Don't thank me yet, he said roughly. 3 weeks is a long time. You might decide I'm terrible company. Doubt it. You don't know me. I know enough. Elena shifted slightly closer, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. I know you're running from something. I know you think distance keeps you safe. I know you're wrong about that, but you haven't figured it out yet. You're very sure of yourself. Have to be. No one else is going to be sure for me. He wanted to argue, wanted to maintain that careful separation, that professional distance that would let him walk away clean when this was over. But sitting here with her, feeling the warmth of another human being who understood loss and survival and the cost of both, that made arguing feel pointless. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I'm glad we found you. Elena looked at him, eyes bright with something that might have been tears or might have been firelight. Me too. They sat together in silence, watching the fire burn down to embers, neither quite willing to break the moment by moving. Marcus had already retired to his bedroll, leaving them the illusion of privacy. Eventually, Elena stood, pulling the blanket tighter around her shoulders. I should sleep. Long day tomorrow. Yeah. She started toward her lean-to, then paused, looking back. Caleb? Yeah. Whatever you're running from, I hope you find a way to stop, because running gets lonely after a while. Before he could respond, she disappeared into the darkness, leaving him sitting alone with the dying fire and a chest full of feelings he'd sworn off years ago. Caleb stayed there long after the fire went cold, staring up at stars that blazed across the Montana sky in their millions. Tomorrow, they'd start the journey to Missoula. 3 weeks together on the trail. 3 weeks of watching her face across campfires, hearing her voice in the morning, seeing the way she moved through the world with that determined grace. 3 weeks to either strengthen his defenses or watch them crumble entirely. He had a terrible suspicion he knew which one it would be. But morning would come regardless, and with it, the road west, winding through mountains that had already taken so much from both of them. The question wasn't whether they'd survive the journey. The question was whether they'd survive each other. The first day on the trail taught Caleb that 3 weeks might as well be 3 years when you were traveling with someone who occupied your thoughts more than the terrain. They'd broken camp at dawn, the air sharp enough to sting lungs and turn breath to vapor. Elena rode the bay mare Marcus had procured from the trading post, a steady animal with gentle eyes and enough sense not to spook at shadows. She sat the saddle with competence, if not grace, back straight, hands light on the reins. Not a natural rider, but someone who'd learned through necessity and made it work through sheer determination. "You do much riding before the wagon train?" Marcus asked, guiding his gelding alongside hers as they climbed toward the first ridge. "Some. My father kept horses on our farm back in Illinois, but that was years ago." Elena adjusted her position slightly, wincing. "I'm remembering muscles I forgot I had." "It'll get easier. Give it a few days, your body'll remember the rhythm." Caleb rode point, eyes scanning the trail ahead with practiced efficiency. The route to Missoula cut through some of the roughest country Montana had to offer. Mountain passes that turned lethal in bad weather, river crossings that could kill you if the current was running high, stretches of open country where you were exposed to whatever predators, human or an animal, happened to be hunting. He'd made this journey twice before, both times with Marcus, both times without complications. But adding a third person changed the mathematics, changed the risk profile, made everything more complicated in ways that had nothing to do with logistics. The morning passed in relative quiet, each of them conserving energy for the long climb ahead. They stopped briefly at midday to water the horses and eat cold biscuits left over from breakfast. Elena dismounted with visible relief, walking in small circles to work the stiffness from her legs. "How far today?" she asked, shading her eyes to look at the mountains rising ahead like a wall between them and everything west. 10 miles, maybe 12 if we push," Marcus replied. "There's a good camping spot near Slate Creek. Sheltered, plenty of water, defensible position. We'll make it by nightfall if the weather holds." "And if it doesn't?" "Then we make camp wherever we are when the rain starts, and hope we don't wash away." Elena smiled slightly. "Optimistic." "Realistic. Weather's the one thing you can't negotiate with out here. It does what it wants, and you adapt or die." They mounted up again, continuing the climb. The trail narrowed as they ascended, forcing them into single file. Caleb led, Marcus brought up the rear, Elena between them like cargo being transported. She didn't complain, didn't ask for breaks, just kept moving with that same stubborn endurance he'd noticed from the first moment. Late afternoon brought clouds rolling in from the west, dark and heavy, pregnant with rain. The temperature dropped noticeably, wind picking up in gusts that bent the pines and sent dead leaves skittering across the trail. "Storm coming?" Marcus observed unnecessarily. Caleb nodded, already scanning for shelter. They were still 2 miles from Slate Creek, and the sky suggested they wouldn't make it that far before the weather broke. A rocky outcrop to their left offered partial cover. Not ideal, but better than being caught in the open. "We're stopping here," he called back. They dismounted quickly, working together to secure the horses and set up a makeshift camp beneath the overhang. The rain started before they'd finished, fat drops that turned into sheets within minutes, drumming on stone and earth with furious intensity. Elena pressed herself against the rock wall, arms wrapped around her knees, watching the deluge with wide eyes. Water streamed off the overhang in a curtain, turning the world beyond their shelter into gray chaos. "This normal?" she asked, voice raised to carry over the noise. Normal enough, Caleb replied, checking that their supplies were protected from the worst of it. Autumn storms come fast and hard in the mountains. They usually pass quick, though. Usually? Sometimes they settle in for days. We'll know by morning. She processed that information with a small nod, then went back to watching the rain. Something in her expression caught his attention. Not fear exactly, but a kind of tense readiness, like she was waiting for the other boot to drop. Marcus noticed it too. "You all right, Miss Ward?" "Fine. Just not fond of storms." She paused, then added quietly, "The night the rock slide happened, it was raining like this. We couldn't hear anything over the noise. Didn't know anything was wrong until the screaming started." The words settled over them like ash, heavy with memory and loss. Caleb felt something tighten in his chest, recognition of trauma, the way it marked you, changed how you experienced ordinary things forever after. "This is different," he said, keeping his voice level. "We're on solid ground, well above any slide paths. The horses are calm. They'd know if something was wrong. We're safe here." Elena looked at him, searching his face for reassurance or maybe just honesty. Whatever she found seemed to satisfy her because her shoulders dropped slightly, tension easing. "Okay," she said simply. They waited out the storm pressed together under stone, sharing body heat and silence. The rain continued for hours, finally tapering off near dusk. When it stopped, the world smelled clean and new, pine sap and wet earth and ozone. Caleb stepped out from under the overhang, assessing the damage. The trail had turned to mud, but it was passable. They'd lost some time, but nothing critical. "We staying here tonight or pushing for Slate Creek?" Marcus asked. Caleb considered. 2 more miles and fading light on slick ground with tired horses, risky but manageable. Or camp here on hard stone with limited space and no water source nearby. "We push," he decided. "Careful and slow, but we push. I don't want to spend the night without water for the animals." They made it to Slate Creek just as full darkness settled over the mountains. The horses drank gratefully while Marcus and Elena set up camp. Caleb built a fire, coaxing flames from damp wood through patience and skill, learned over years of practice. When the fire was burning steady, Elena moved close to it, holding her hands toward the warmth. Her clothes were damp, hair escaping its braid in dark tendrils around her face. She looked exhausted and young and tougher than nails all at once. "First day down," she said, attempting brightness. "How many more?" 20 give or take," Marcus replied. "But they get easier once your body adjusts to the rhythm. Or harder once I run out of places that don't hurt." Caleb found himself almost smiling. "You did good today. Kept up, didn't complain, handled the storm without panic. That's more than a lot of people manage on their first day." Elena looked at him, surprise flickering across her features. "Was that a compliment?" "Observation. You and your observations." But she was smiling slightly, some of the tension leaving her frame. They ate dinner in companionable quiet, salt pork and beans heated over the fire, washed down with creek water that tasted like minerals and cold. Not fancy, but filling. Survival food that kept you moving. As darkness deepened, stars began appearing in the gaps between clouds, scattered at first, then blazing in their thousands as the sky cleared. Elena tilted her head back, staring upward with an expression caught between wonder and grief. "My father used to say you could navigate by stars if you knew how to read them," she said softly. "He tried to teach me once. I never learned properly. Wish I had now." "It's not too late," Marcus offered. "Plenty of stars between here and Missoula. I could show you the basics if you want." "I'd like that." They spent the next hour in an impromptu astronomy lesson, Marcus pointing out constellations, explaining how to find north by locating Polaris, describing how sailors and travelers had used celestial navigation for thousands of years. Elena listened with focused attention, asking smart questions, committing information to memory with the determination of someone who understood that knowledge could mean survival. Caleb watched them, feeling something warm and complicated unfold in his chest. This, sitting around a fire, sharing knowledge, building connection, this was what he'd avoided for 2 years. This was the thing that made survival into living, and living into something worth protecting. Dangerous. Terribly dangerous. "I'm going to check the perimeter," he said abruptly, standing. He walked the edge of their camp, listening to night sounds, wind in trees, creek water over stones, the occasional call of an owl hunting in darkness, letting the cold air clear his head, trying to rebuild the distance that kept eroding every time Elena smiled or asked him a question or looked at him like he was someone worth knowing. "You keep running away," her voice came from behind him. She'd followed silently, appeared at his shoulder like a ghost. "Every time something gets close to mattering, you find an excuse to leave." Caleb didn't turn around. "I'm checking for threats." "Are you? Or are you hiding from one?" "What threat would I be hiding from?" "Connection, caring. The possibility that maybe being alone isn't as safe as you've convinced yourself it is." He turned then, finding her closer than expected, eyes reflecting starlight. "You don't know me well enough to make those assumptions." "Don't I?" "We're not that different, Caleb. We've both lost people. Both decided that keeping everyone at arm's length was safer than risking it again. The only difference is I'm tired of being alone, and you're still convinced it's the only way to survive." The words hit harder than they should have. Accurate shots fired from someone who'd known him less than a week, but somehow saw straight through every defense he'd built. "What do you want from me?" he asked, hearing the frustration bleed into his voice. "Nothing you're not ready to give. I'm just saying running works until it doesn't. And eventually you end up so far from everything that matters that you forget why you started running in the first place." She held his gaze for another moment, then turned and walked back toward the fire, leaving him standing alone in darkness with the uncomfortable feeling that she was right. Caleb stayed out there longer than necessary, wrestling with thoughts that had no easy resolution. When he finally returned to camp, Elena was already in her bedroll, eyes closed, breathing steady. Marcus raised an eyebrow at him but said nothing, which was somehow worse than questions would have been. He settled into his own blankets, staring up at the stars Elena had been so eager to learn, and wondered what the hell he was doing. The next 5 days followed a pattern. Wake at dawn, break camp, ride until midday, rest briefly, ride until dusk, make camp, eat, sleep, repeat. The country grew rougher as they pushed deeper into the mountains. Narrow trails carved into cliffsides, river crossings that required careful navigation, passes so steep the horses struggled despite being mountain-bred. Elena proved herself again and again. She learned fast, adapted quickly, never asked for special treatment or concessions. When her mare threw a shoe, she helped Marcus replace it, getting her hands dirty without complaint. When they needed to ford a swollen creek, she went first, trusting her horse and the guidance they gave her. When supplies ran low, she suggested rationing strategies that made their provisions stretch further. And through it all, she kept talking to Caleb, gentle, persistent conversation that slowly wore down his resistance like water on stone. "Tell me about Kansas," she said one evening as they sat by the fire. "Before everything. What was it like?" He wanted to deflect, change subjects, retreat into silence, but her question was genuine, and denying it felt like cowardice. "Flat," he said finally. "Nothing but grassland and sky for miles in every direction. You could see weather coming from a day away. The wind never stopped. There were days it felt like it would scour the skin right off your bones." "Did you like it?" "I loved it. It was hard country, but it was honest. You knew what you were dealing with. None of these mountains hiding what's coming." "What made you choose it? Kansas, I mean. Why there?" Caleb was quiet for a moment, sifting through memories that still had edges sharp enough to cut. "Sarah's family had land there. Her father offered us a section if we'd work it, build it up. We were young, stupid, thought hard work and good intentions were enough." He paused. "Turned out they weren't." Elena didn't offer sympathy or platitudes. She just nodded, acknowledging the weight of what he'd shared. "Do you ever think about going back?" "No." "Why not?" "Because everything that mattered is buried there. Going back would just mean standing over graves. Or it could mean reclaiming something that was taken from you. There's nothing left to reclaim." Elena studied him in the firelight, something working behind her eyes. "I think you're wrong about that. I think there's still something there. You're just too afraid to look for it. And what would that be? The part of you that knows how to be happy. The part that believed in futures and building things that last. You left that in Kansas along with everything else." Caleb felt anger flash hot and sudden. Defensive fury at being seen so clearly, at having his carefully constructed armor dismantled by someone who had no right to understand him this well. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said, voice tight. "Maybe not. But I know what it looks like when someone's given up on everything except breathing. I see it in the mirror every morning." She leaned forward slightly, intensity blazing in her expression. "The difference between us is I'm still fighting it. You've accepted it as permanent. And how's that working for you? All that fighting? Better than surrender. At least I still want things. At least I still believe there's something worth reaching for beyond just making it through another day." "Like what? Teaching children in some settlement that might not even exist? Building a life in country that's already killed dozens of people tougher than you?" The words came out harsher than he'd intended. Weapons deployed to create distance, to push her away before she got any closer to the parts of him that were still raw and unhealed. Elena flinched, but didn't retreat. "Yes, exactly like that. Because hoping for something better is the only thing that separates living from just surviving. And I'm done just surviving." She stood abruptly, walking away from the fire into the darkness beyond its reach. Caleb sat frozen, the anger draining out of him as quickly as it had flared, leaving nothing but guilt and the sick feeling that he'd just hurt someone who didn't deserve it. Marcus, who'd been silent through the entire exchange, finally spoke. "You're an idiot, Monroe." "I know. That woman is offering you something most people never get twice, a chance to care about someone again. And you're throwing it back in her face because you're too damn scared to try." "I'm not scared. You're terrified. Have been since the day we found her. I've watched you fight it every mile, every conversation, every moment she looks at you like you're worth knowing. And you know what's really pathetic? She knows it too. Knows you're running, knows you're scared, and she's still here trying anyway." Caleb stood, jaw tight. "What do you want me to do?" "Stop running. Stop pretending distance keeps you safe. Stop punishing yourself for surviving when someone you loved didn't." Marcus's voice softened slightly. "Sarah wouldn't want this for you. You know that." The name landed like a blow. Caleb hadn't spoken it aloud in months, hadn't allowed himself to think about her except in the dark hours before dawn when defenses were lowest. Hearing it now from Marcus, in the context of Elena, it felt like betrayal and permission all at once. "I should go apologize," he said quietly. "Yeah, you should." Caleb found her sitting on a fallen log about 50 yards from camp, arms wrapped around herself, staring at nothing. She didn't turn when he approached, but the subtle tension in her shoulders said she knew he was there. "I'm sorry," he said, the words feeling inadequate but necessary. "I shouldn't have said that. Any of it." Elena was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried hurt but not anger. "You meant it, though. You think I'm foolish for hoping, for wanting more than just survival." "No. I think you're braver than I am, and that scares the hell out of me." She looked at him then, surprise flickering across her features. "Why?" Caleb sat down beside her, close enough to feel her warmth, far enough to maintain the illusion of space. "Because hope requires vulnerability, requires believing that tomorrow might be better than today, that building something matters even when you know it could all come apart. I gave up on that. Decided it was safer to just keep moving, never plant roots deep enough to hurt when they get torn out. And now? Now I'm sitting here terrified that I might be wrong, that maybe surrender isn't strength, that maybe you're right and there's still something worth fighting for beyond just making it through another day." Elena shifted closer, closing the distance between them until their shoulders touched. The contact sent electricity through him, simple human warmth that felt profound after years of self-imposed isolation. "I can't promise it won't hurt," she said softly. "Caring always hurts eventually, but the hurt means it mattered, means you were alive enough to feel something real. What if I've forgotten how? What if I'm too broken to do this properly? Then you learn again. We both do. Together, if you'll let us try." Caleb turned to look at her, really look, seeing past his fear to the woman beside him, young and scarred and fierce, offering him something precious despite having every reason to guard herself just as carefully as he did. "I don't know if I can be what you need," he admitted. "I don't need you to be anything except honest, present, willing to try." She paused, then added with a small smile, "And maybe a little less likely to run away every time things get real." Despite everything, he found himself almost smiling. "I'll work on that." "Good." They sat together in silence, neither quite willing to break the moment by moving. Above them, stars wheeled across the sky in their ancient patterns, the same stars humans had navigated by for thousands of years, finding their way through darkness toward destinations they could only hope existed. Eventually, they walked back to camp together. Something fundamental shifted between them. Marcus looked up as they approached, relief evident in his expression. "We good?" he asked. "We're good," Elena confirmed. That night, Caleb lay awake long after the others had fallen asleep, staring at stars and thinking about choices. The choice to close yourself off or open yourself up. The choice to keep running or finally stand still. The choice to let the past define you or fight for something different. He didn't have answers yet, but for the first time in 2 years, he was willing to sit with the questions. The remaining days to Missoula passed faster than expected. They fell into an easy rhythm, Marcus's steady presence providing stability, Elena's determined optimism offering light, Caleb's careful navigation keeping them safe. They talked more, argued less, built the small intimacies that turned strangers into companions. Elena proved particularly good at finding humor in hardship. When they got caught in another rainstorm and had to spend a miserable night huddled under inadequate shelter, she started a game identifying the most ridiculous things they could be doing instead. When Marcus's horse went lame and they had to add a day to their journey, she used the time to practice shooting, improving her marksmanship through sheer stubborn repetition. And slowly, carefully, she drew Caleb out, asking questions about his childhood, his time in Kansas, the things he'd loved before loss taught him not to. He found himself answering more easily, the words coming less painfully each time. "What did you want to be when you were young?" she asked one afternoon as they rode through a valley carpeted in wildflowers despite the lateness of the season. "A rancher. Not just a hired hand, but someone who built something permanent. Had my own land, my own herd, something to pass down." "You could still do that." "Could I?" "I've spent 2 years drifting. Not sure I remember how to stay in one place." "So learn again. You're good at learning. I've watched you adapt to everything the trail throws at you. Why would this be different?" "Because adapting to terrain is mechanics. Adapting to caring about outcomes again is—" He trailed off, searching for words. "Scary," Elena supplied. "Yeah." "Good. Scary means it matters." They crested a rise on the 18th day and caught their first glimpse of the Missoula Valley spreading below. Patchwork fields and scattered buildings clustered around a river that caught afternoon light like molten silver. "There it is," Marcus said with satisfaction. 2 days early, no major disasters, everyone still breathing. I'd call that a successful journey. Elena stared at the settlement with an expression Caleb couldn't quite read, hope mixed with apprehension, determination shadowed by doubt. "It's real," she said softly. "I wasn't sure it would be." "Second thoughts?" Caleb heard himself ask. "No, just wondering if I'm ready for this, for permanence, for trying to build something that might actually last." "You'll be fine, better than fine. Those kids are lucky to have you." She looked at him, and her smile carried weight that had nothing to do with teaching. "What about you? Where do you go when this is done?" "Back to Fort Ellis, probably. Pick up another contract, another search, another temporary purpose that required nothing beyond competence and distance. The same pattern he'd followed for 2 years. Safe, predictable, empty. "Haven't decided yet," he said, which was closer to truth than he wanted to admit. They made camp that night on a bluff overlooking the valley, close enough to reach the settlement by noon the next day. Their final night together felt weighted with things unsaid, with the looming reality that this temporary arrangement was ending. After dinner, Elena walked to the edge of the bluff, staring down at lights beginning to appear in the settlement below. Caleb joined her after a moment's hesitation, standing close enough that their arms almost touched. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for getting me here, for not giving up on me when you could have. You made it pretty hard to give up on. Still, most people would have dropped me at the nearest fort and moved on. You didn't." "Yeah, well, you're stubborn. Figured you'd just try the journey alone and get yourself killed. Seemed wasteful." She laughed, the sound bright against darkness. Always so romantic, Monroe. Romantic's not my area. No, what is your area? Survival, observation, avoiding feelings until they go away. How's that working for you? Poorly, since I met you. Elena turned to face him fully, something serious moving behind her eyes. Caleb, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest. Warning bells went off in his head, but he nodded. All right. When we get to Missoula tomorrow, when this arrangement ends and you ride out, are you going to disappear, or is there a chance I might see you again? The question hung between them, carrying implications that terrified and tempted him in equal measure. This was the moment, the choice, the place where running and staying diverged into separate futures. I don't know, he said honestly. Part of me wants to ride out and not look back, keep things simple, keep moving, avoid the complications. And the other part? The other part wants to stay. See what happens if I stop running. Find out if I'm capable of building something again instead of just passing through. Which part wins? I don't know yet. Ask me tomorrow. Elena nodded slowly, accepting the uncertainty even as disappointment flickered across her features. Fair enough. Tomorrow, then. She started to turn away, but Caleb caught her hand, gentle, tentative, the first deliberately intimate contact between them. She froze, looking down at their joined hands with surprise. For what it's worth, he said quietly, you make me want to try. That's more than anyone's managed in a very long time. Elena's fingers tightened around his, and when she looked up, her eyes were bright. Then try. Stay. We'll figure out the rest as we go. It might not work. Probably won't. Most things don't. But at least we'd know we tried instead of spending the rest of our lives wondering what if. She was right. He knew she was right. Running was safe but empty. Staying was terrifying but real. And he'd spent 2 years choosing safe over real, watching his life shrink down to nothing except survival. I'll think about it, he said, which was as close to a promise as he could manage. That's all I'm asking. They stood together on the bluff while stars blazed overhead and the future waited below, unknowable and vast. Tomorrow would bring choices that couldn't be unmade, paths that diverged toward different horizons. But tonight, just for now, they had this. Two people who'd survived impossible things standing side by side, considering the possibility that maybe survival wasn't enough anymore. That maybe, just maybe, they deserved to try for something more. Morning came too fast and too slow all at once. Caleb woke before dawn, unable to sleep through the churning in his chest that felt like anticipation and dread tangled together. He lay in his bedroll watching the sky lighten from black to deep blue to pale gray, listening to Marcus's steady snoring and the quieter sound of Elena's breathing from her blankets nearby. Today they'd reach Missoula. Today the journey ended. Today he'd have to choose. He rose quietly, building up the fire and setting coffee to boil. The routine motions helped settle his thoughts, or at least gave his hands something to do while his mind raced through scenarios, outcomes, consequences. Stay or go. Risk or safety. The future or the past. You're up early. Elena's voice came soft from behind him. She'd emerged from her bedroll, hair loose around her shoulders, wrapped in a blanket against the morning chill. Couldn't sleep. Me neither. She moved to sit beside him near the fire, accepting the cup of coffee he poured without asking. Nervous? Something like that. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun broke over the eastern ridges, spilling gold across the valley below. The settlement of Missoula looked almost peaceful from up here, a scattering of buildings arranged along the river, smoke rising from chimneys as people woke to another day of building lives in hard country. What are you thinking? Elena asked after a while. Caleb considered lying, deflecting, retreating into the safety of non-answers. But they'd come too far for that now. She deserved honesty, even when it was complicated. I'm thinking that I spent 2 years convincing myself that staying detached was the same as staying safe, that if I didn't care about anything, I couldn't lose anything. Clean math. He paused, staring into his coffee. Then you show up, and suddenly the math doesn't work anymore. Why not? Because you make me care whether I want to or not. Make me think about futures beyond next week. Make me remember what it felt like to want something more than just making it through another day. He looked at her directly. and that's terrifying. Elena held his gaze, something fierce and gentle moving in her expression. Good. You should be terrified. Means you're still alive enough to feel something real. Before he could respond, Marcus stirred and sat up with a groan, scrubbing a hand across his face. You two starting the deep conversations before coffee? That's just cruel. The moment broke, shifting into the familiar routine of breaking camp and preparing to move. But something had been said that couldn't be unsaid, and Caleb felt it following him through the morning like a shadow with weight. They reached the settlement just before noon, riding down the wide main street between buildings that ranged from permanent structures to tents with optimistic signs. People stopped to watch them pass, 3 trail-worn riders on tired horses, clearly coming from somewhere far and hard. Elena sat straighter in her saddle, chin lifted, meeting curious stares with calm dignity. Whatever nervousness she felt, she kept it buried deep. Caleb found himself admiring that strength, the way she faced uncertainty without flinching. Marcus led them to a modest building with a hand-painted sign reading Settlement Office. A man emerged as they dismounted, middle-aged, weathered, with the careful eyes of someone used to evaluating strangers quickly. "Help you folks?" he asked, friendly but cautious. "This is Elena Ward," Marcus said, gesturing. "She's looking for teaching work. We heard you were establishing a school." The man's expression shifted to interest. "Jonas Fletcher. I run the settlement office here." He looked at Elena with undisguised hope. "You have teaching experience, Miss Ward?" "Some. I taught children back in Illinois before coming west. Reading, writing, arithmetic, basic sciences. I'm willing to learn whatever else is needed." "Can you prove it? Your education, I mean. We've had folks claim qualifications they didn't possess." Elena reached into her saddlebag and produced a worn leather folder. Inside were certificates, letters of reference, even samples of her handwriting, all carefully preserved through wagon trains and wilderness survival. Fletcher examined them with growing satisfaction. "This is excellent, better than excellent. We've got near 30 children here with no formal schooling available. Been trying to find someone qualified for months." He looked up. "When can you start?" "Immediately, if you'll have me." "Room and board included, plus a small salary. We can't pay much yet, but the community supports the school. You won't go hungry." Fletcher paused, then added carefully, "It'll be hard work. These are frontier children, tough, independent, not all of them eager to sit still for lessons." Elena smiled, and Caleb saw steel beneath the warmth. "I spent 2 weeks alone in the mountains surviving on stubbornness and willpower. I think I can handle some reluctant students." Fletcher laughed, genuine and relieved. "I believe you can. Come on, I'll show you the schoolhouse and your quarters. We'll get you settled." He started toward a building down the street, then paused, looking back at Marcus and Caleb. "You gentlemen staying in town? We've got a boarding house, decent meals, fair rates." Marcus glanced at Caleb, the question clear in his eyes. Caleb felt the weight of decision pressing down. This was the moment. Ride out now, keep things simple, or stay and face whatever came next. "I'll stay a few days," Marcus decided. "Rest the horses, resupply, see how Miss Ward settles in." Fletcher nodded, then looked at Caleb expectantly. "And you?" Elena had turned back, watching him with an expression that tried for casual and didn't quite make it. Hope and fear balanced there, waiting for his answer. "I'll stay," Caleb heard himself say. "For a while." Relief washed across Elena's face so clearly it made his chest ache. She didn't say anything, just nodded once, but her eyes spoke volumes. They spent the afternoon getting Elena situated. The schoolhouse was a simple structure, one room with a wood stove, benches for students, a desk for the teacher, and windows that let in good light. Her quarters were attached, a small room with a bed, a chair, a washstand. Modest but clean, and more importantly, hers. "It's perfect," she said, running her hand along the desk with something like reverence. "I can make this work." Fletcher left them to get organized, promising to spread word that school would begin Monday morning. When he was gone, Elena turned to face Marcus and Caleb, emotion working behind her carefully maintained composure. "I don't know how to thank you," she said quietly. "You got me here, kept me safe, gave me a chance when you could have just left me in those mountains." Marcus waved it off. "Just doing the job, Miss Ward." "It was more than that. You both know it was. She looked at Caleb specifically. Will you come back before you leave town, I mean? I'd like to talk. Properly. Yeah, I'll come back. Promise? Promise. They left her there, standing in her new schoolhouse with sunlight streaming through windows and possibilities stretching before her like open country. Walking back toward the boarding house, Marcus was quiet until they'd almost reached it, then spoke without looking at Caleb. You planning to actually stay, or are you just delaying the inevitable? I don't know yet. Might want to figure it out before you hurt that woman. She's been through enough. I know. Do you? Because from where I'm standing, you're still halfway out the door. And that's not fair to either of you. Caleb stopped walking. What do you want me to say, Marcus? That I'm ready to stay in one place, build a life, risk everything I've been avoiding? I can't promise that. I don't know if I'm capable of it anymore. Then figure it out. Quick, because she deserves better than maybe. Marcus continued toward the boarding house, leaving Caleb standing alone in the street with questions that had no easy answers. The next 3 days passed in a strange limbo. Caleb helped Marcus maintain their gear, resupply their provisions, prepare for the journey back to Fort Ellis that loomed but hadn't been scheduled yet. He also spent time exploring Missoula, learning its rhythms, watching how people built lives in this rough country. The settlement was growing, new families arriving weekly, businesses opening, infrastructure slowly taking shape. There was energy here, optimism, the collective belief that hard work could transform wilderness into civilization. It reminded him of Kansas in the early days, before tragedy taught him that belief and effort weren't always enough. He visited Elena each evening, sitting in the schoolhouse while she prepared lessons and organized supplies donated by community members. They talked about safe things mostly, her plans for the curriculum, his observations about the settlement, Marcus's endless complaints about his aging joints. But underneath ran a current of unspoken questions, waiting for the courage to surface. On the fourth night, Elena finally asked directly, "Have you decided? About staying?" They were sitting on the schoolhouse steps, watching the last light fade from the western sky. Caleb had been dreading and anticipating this conversation in equal measure. "I keep trying to," he admitted. "Keep running through scenarios, weighing options, looking for the answer that makes sense. And I keep coming back to the same problem. I don't trust myself with this. With you. With any of it." Elena turned to face him fully. "Why not?" "Because I failed before. I built something, believed in it, and when the moment came, I wasn't there. I was in town buying supplies while Sarah died. I was useless when it mattered most." The words came out raw, unfiltered. The core fear he'd carried for 2 years, the belief that had shaped every choice since, that he was fundamentally untrustworthy with anything that mattered. Elena was quiet for a long moment, then spoke with careful precision. "You know that's not rational, right? You couldn't have predicted a raid. Couldn't have known that particular day would be the one. You made a normal choice that had terrible consequences, but that doesn't make you responsible for what happened. Doesn't it? If I'd been there, you might have died too, or you might have saved her, or you might have made it worse. There's no way to know, and torturing yourself with maybes doesn't change what happened." She paused, then added more gently, "Sarah died. That's a tragedy, but you're still alive. And punishing yourself by refusing to live fully doesn't honor her memory. It just wastes what you still have." Caleb felt something crack in his chest, pressure he'd been holding for so long he'd forgotten it was there. "I don't know how to stop. The guilt, the fear, the conviction that anything I care about will get destroyed. You start. You try. You fail probably, then try again. It's not about being perfect or fearless. It's about being willing to keep showing up even when it's hard." Elena reached out, taking his hand in hers. "I'm not asking you to be healed or whole or certain. I'm asking you to try. With me. Together." Before he could respond, a commotion erupted from the street, shouting, the sound of running feet. They stood quickly, instincts honed by hard country recognizing crisis when it struck. A man ran past, calling out urgently. "The Patterson boy's missing. Wandered off during chores, hasn't been seen for 2 hours. Sun's going down and there's a storm coming." More people emerged from buildings, organizing search parties with the practiced efficiency of a community used to crisis. Caleb spotted Jonas Fletcher coordinating groups, assigning search areas, managing the controlled chaos. "We need everyone who can track," Fletcher called out. "The boy's only 6, and if he's out there when this storm hits—" He didn't finish. Didn't need to. Everyone understood the mathematics. 6-year-old child alone in mountains, storm approaching, temperature dropping. The window for finding him alive was measured in hours, maybe less. Caleb was already moving toward Fletcher before conscious thought caught up. "I can track. I'll help." Helena appeared at his shoulder. "Me too." "Miss Ward, you're not—" "I spent 2 weeks surviving alone in worse country than this. I can handle a search." Her voice carried absolute conviction, brooking no argument. Fletcher hesitated only a moment, then nodded. "Fine. You're with Monroe. Cover the northeast quadrant toward Boulder Creek. The boy likes exploring, might have headed toward water." They gathered supplies quickly, rope, blankets, lanterns for when darkness fell. The sky was already darkening with the storm's approach, heavy clouds rolling in from the west with ominous speed. Marcus caught Caleb's arm as they prepared to move out. "Be careful. Storm looks mean, and the country up Boulder Creek gets rough fast." "We'll be fine." "You better be. I didn't ride 3 weeks to watch you get yourself killed playing hero." Despite the tension, Caleb almost smiled. "Appreciate the concern. Just find that kid and get back safe, both of you." They moved out with 3 other search parties, each taking different areas. The northeast quadrant led them into increasingly rough terrain, rocky slopes dotted with pines, narrow ravines carved by seasonal runoff, plenty of places for a small boy to fall, or get trapped, or simply hide in fear. Elena moved through the country with surprising competence, eyes scanning for disturbances, broken branches, small footprints. She'd learned well during their journey, absorbed the skills Marcus had taught about reading sign and following trails. "There," she said suddenly, pointing to a patch of disturbed earth near a game trail. "Something small came through here recently." Caleb examined it, confirming her observation. Child-sized prints, moving with the wandering pattern of someone exploring rather than traveling with purpose. Following the trail took them deeper into the hills, away from the settlement and toward the creek Fletcher had mentioned. The storm caught them half an hour later, rain that started as scattered drops and escalated within minutes to torrential downpour. Visibility dropped to almost nothing, the world reducing to gray sheets of water and the immediate ground beneath their feet. "We need shelter," Elena called over the noise, already soaked through. "Not yet. The boy's out here somewhere, and this rain will kill him faster than us." They pushed forward, following the fading trail through conditions that would have made most people turn back. Caleb's mind was locked on the mission now, everything else falling away. Find the child. Keep Elena safe. Make it back alive. Simple objectives, complicated by nature's indifference. The creek appeared suddenly, swollen with rain running fast and angry between steep banks. And there, huddled beneath an overhang on the far side, was a small figure wrapped in what looked like a torn jacket. "There!" Elena spotted him first, pointing through the rain. The boy, 6 years old, Patterson's son, looked up at her shout, his face a mask of terror and cold. He tried to stand, slipped on wet rocks, caught himself barely. "Stay there!" Caleb yelled. "Don't move! We're coming!" But getting across was the problem. The creek was running too high and fast to ford safely, the current strong enough to sweep an adult off their feet, let alone a child. And the rain showed no signs of stopping. If anything, it was intensifying, turning the world into a waterlogged nightmare. "We need to get him before the water rises more," Elena said, already assessing options. "That overhang won't protect him if the creek keeps swelling." She was right. They had maybe 20 minutes before the creek became completely impassable and the boy's shelter became a trap. Caleb scanned the terrain, mind racing through solutions. Upstream about 30 yards, a fallen pine stretched partway across the creek. Not a bridge exactly, but close enough. If they could reach it, cross using the trunk for stability, they might make it to the boy's side. "There," he said, pointing. "We used the tree." They scrambled upstream through mud and rain, reaching the fallen pine within minutes. Up close, it looked less stable than hoped. Wet bark, branches broken off, the far end submerged in rushing water. But it was the only option they had. "I'll go first," Caleb decided. Test if it'll hold. If I make it across, you follow. We get the boy, come back the same way. And if the tree doesn't hold, then we find another way. But we're running out of time. Elena grabbed his arm before he could start across. Caleb, be careful. I didn't come this far to lose you to a creek. He looked at her, really looked, seeing past his fear to the person standing beside him. Someone who'd survived impossible things and still believed in trying. Someone who made him want to be brave enough to deserve that belief. I'll be careful, he promised. You too. He stepped onto the trunk, using branches for handholds, moving with deliberate precision. The wood was slick beneath his boots, shifting slightly with each step as current tugged at the submerged portion. Halfway across, a surge of water hit the tree, and it rolled slightly, nearly dumping him into the torrent. He caught himself, heart hammering, and kept moving. When he reached the far bank, he turned to signal Elena. She was already starting across, moving with the same careful determination she brought to everything. He watched her progress with breath held, knowing that if she fell, there was nothing he could do except watch her get swept away. She made it. Stepped onto solid ground beside him, breathing hard, eyes bright with adrenaline. See, she said, attempting levity. Easy. Absolutely terrifying, you mean? That too. They reached the boy within minutes. He was hypothermic, shaking violently, lips blue, barely responsive. Caleb wrapped him in the blanket they'd brought while Elena spoke to him in soothing tones, trying to keep him conscious and calm. We've got you. You're safe now. We're going to get you home to your parents. The boy, Tommy, she called him, managed a weak nod. I'm cold. I know. We'll fix that. Can you walk? I think so. Getting back across the creek was harder with a semi-conscious child between them. Caleb went first, carrying Tommy on his back, while Elena followed close behind, ready to help if needed. The tree seemed less stable than before, shifting more with each step, groaning under their combined weight. They were 3/4 across when it happened. A massive surge of water, debris from upstream creating a temporary dam that broke all at once, slammed into the tree with enough force to tear it free from the bank. The trunk rolled violently, dumping all 3 of them into the freezing torrent. Caleb went under, the cold so intense it drove the air from his lungs. He surfaced gasping, still gripping Tommy with desperate strength, fighting current that wanted to pull them apart and drag them downstream toward rocks and death. Elena, he shouted, scanning frantically. She appeared 10 feet away, struggling against the water, being swept toward a cluster of boulders that would crush her if she hit them wrong. Without thinking, Caleb lunged toward her, one arm locked around Tommy, the other reaching desperately for Elena. Their hands connected, slick with water but holding nonetheless. He pulled her close, wrapping both her and the boy against his chest, and aimed for the bank. The current fought him every inch, trying to tear them apart, but he held on with strength born of absolute refusal to fail. His feet hit bottom, found purchase on rocks beneath the surface. He pushed toward shore with legs that felt like lead, lungs screaming for air, arms locked around the 2 people he was not going to lose. They collapsed on this bank in a tangle of limbs and exhaustion, gasping, shaking, alive. Tommy was crying, which was good, meant he was conscious and breathing. Elena coughed up water, rolled to her side, looked at Caleb with eyes that held shock and relief in equal measure. We made it, she said, wonder in her voice. Yeah, we made it. They lay there for precious seconds, letting the reality settle, that they'd come within moments of dying, that survival was a gift not guaranteed. Then training kicked in and they moved, stripping Tommy of wet clothes, wrapping him in dry layers from the pack Caleb had somehow kept during the plunge, creating shelter beneath a rocky overhang while the storm continued its assault. Elena worked with mechanical efficiency despite her own hypothermia setting in, focused entirely on keeping the boy alive. Caleb built a fire using techniques learned over years of hard country, finding dry tinder in protected crevices, coaxing flame from damp wood through patience and skill, building heat that might save all their lives. When the fire was burning steady, they huddled around it with Tommy between them, sharing body heat and waiting for the storm to pass. The boy's shaking gradually eased as warmth returned, color coming back to his face in slow degrees. Thank you, he whispered eventually. You saved me. Elena smoothed his wet hair back from his forehead. You're very brave, Tommy. and you're going to be fine. The storm finally broke near dusk, rain tapering to drizzle, then stopping altogether. In the sudden quiet, they could hear voices in the distance. Other search parties, still looking. Caleb stood on shaky legs and shouted, "Here! We found him! Northeast of the creek!" Answering calls came back, growing closer. Within 20 minutes, Jonas Fletcher and half a dozen others emerged from the trees, relief and joy transforming their faces when they saw Tommy alive. "You found him! How? The creek was running so high, we thought—" Fletcher stopped, taking in their soaked condition, the makeshift camp, the evidence of near disaster narrowly avoided. "What happened?" "Got complicated," Caleb said simply. "But everyone's alive. That's what matters." They made it back to the settlement as full darkness settled, Tommy riding on Fletcher's shoulders, Elena and Caleb following in exhausted silence. The entire town seemed to pour into the streets, celebrating the boys' safe return, praising the rescuers who'd risked everything. Tommy's parents appeared, his mother sobbing with relief, his father trying to maintain composure and failing entirely. They swept their son into their arms, holding him like they'd never let go. Mrs. Patterson turned to Caleb and Elena, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you. Thank you for bringing him back. I don't know how to— We owe you everything." "You don't owe us anything," Elena said gently. "We did what anyone would do. Not anyone would go into a storm like that. Not anyone would risk the creek when it was running that high. You're heroes." The words sat uncomfortably on Caleb's shoulders. Heroes were people who succeeded without fear, who made the right choices through wisdom and courage. He'd just been terrified and desperate, holding on to 2 lives with everything he had because the alternative was unthinkable. But looking at Tommy alive and safe in his mother's arms, at Elena standing beside him exhausted and magnificent, at the community gathered in gratitude, maybe heroism wasn't about fearlessness. Maybe it was about facing terror and trying anyway. Later, after the celebration died down and people dispersed to their homes, Caleb and Elena sat on the schoolhouse steps again. Both still damp, both running on fumes, both processing what they'd survived. "That was close," Elena said quietly. "When we went into the water, I thought—" "I know, me too. But we didn't die. We held on, and we made it. Yeah." She turned to look at him, and her expression held something that made his breath catch. "You held on. You had the boy. You were fighting the current, and you still reached for me. Didn't let go even when it would have been easier." "Of course I didn't let go. I couldn't—" He stopped, the truth crystallizing with sudden clarity. "I couldn't lose you. The thought of you being swept away, of not making it back, of never seeing you again, it was worse than anything, worse than the fear, worse than the current, worse than dying. So I held on." "Why?" The question was simple. The answer was enormous. Because somewhere between finding you in those mountains and right now, you became the thing that matters most. The thing I can't walk away from even if I wanted to. The thing that makes trying worthwhile. He paused, then said what had been building for weeks. "I love you. I didn't mean to, tried not to, but I do." Elena's eyes filled with tears that had nothing to do with the storm. "Say it again." "I love you." "Again." "I love you, Elena Ward. And I'm done running, done pretending distance keeps me safe, done choosing survival over living." He took her hands in his, holding tight like he'd held her in the creek. "I'm staying here with you, building whatever comes next. If you'll have me." She answered by kissing him, fierce and desperate and joyful all at once, hands tangling in his wet hair, body pressed against his like she was afraid he'd disappear if she let go. He kissed her back with everything he'd been holding inside for 2 years, all the fear and hope and stubborn love that refused to die no matter how hard he'd tried to kill it. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Elena was smiling through tears. "I love you too," she said. "Have since you promised to help me reach safety, even though you clearly wanted to run. Have watched you fight it every day since. Have been hoping you'd figure it out before you rode away and left me wondering what if." "No more what ifs. Just what is." "And what is that?" Caleb looked around at the settlement, rough and raw and growing, full of people building futures in hard country. Looked at the schoolhouse where Elena would shape young minds. Looked at her, magnificent and brave in his. "This is home," he said. Finally. The settlement celebrated Tommy Patterson's rescue for 3 days, but Caleb barely noticed the festivities. He was too busy trying to figure out what staying actually meant, how to build a life when you'd spent years perfecting the art of leaving. Marcus found him the morning after the storm, sitting outside the boarding house with coffee gone cold in his hands, staring at nothing in particular. "You look like a man who just made a decision he's not sure about," Marcus observed, settling onto the bench beside him. "I told her I'd stay." "I heard. Whole town's heard. You're the hero who saved the boy and won the schoolteacher's heart. They're probably writing songs about you already." Caleb grimaced. "Don't." "Too late. Mrs. Patterson's already commissioned a painting. You'll be immortalized whether you like it or not." Marcus paused, then asked more seriously, "You having second thoughts?" "Not about Elena, about whether I know how to do this. Stay in one place, build something permanent, be the kind of man who deserves what she's offering. You know the secret to that?" "What?" "You just do it. One day at a time, one choice at a time. Nobody knows how at first. You learn by trying and failing and trying again." Marcus sipped his own coffee, watching the settlement come to life as people emerged to start their day. "You think I knew how to be a scout when I started? I was a Kansas farm boy who'd never been west of St. Louis. But I learned, same as you'll learn this. It's different. Scouting's temporary. This is permanent. Only if you let it be. Nothing's truly permanent, Monroe. People die, places change, circumstances shift. But that doesn't mean you don't try. It means you appreciate what you have while you have it." Caleb turned to look at his friend, this man who'd pulled him out of grief 2 years ago, given him purpose when he had none, taught him how to survive if not how to live. "You're not coming back with me, are you? To Fort Ellis?" Marcus smiled slightly. "Was wondering when you'd figure that out." "No, I'm not. I'm getting too old for this work, and my joints agree. Time I found somewhere to settle too. Figured I'd stay here, see if the settlement needs a man who knows the territory. Maybe do some guiding for incoming families, help with security, make myself useful. You staying because of me? I'm staying because I'm tired and this place seems as good as any. You being here is just a bonus." Marcus stood, stretching with audible creaks. "Besides, someone needs to keep you honest. Make sure you don't bolt first time things get difficult." "I won't bolt. We'll see. Love's easy when it's new and shiny. Gets harder when reality sets in." Before Caleb could respond, Elena appeared around the corner, looking fresh despite yesterday's ordeal. She spotted them and smiled, the expression lighting her whole face in ways that made Caleb's chest ache. "Morning," she called. "Am I interrupting?" "Not at all," Marcus said, already moving away with suspicious convenience. "I was just leaving. Got business to attend to." Elena watched him go, then turned to Caleb with raised eyebrows. "Was it something I said?" "He's giving us privacy, being subtle about it, which means he's not being subtle at all." She laughed and sat where Marcus had been, close enough that their shoulders touched. "How are you feeling? After yesterday, I mean. We didn't really talk about it." "Sore, tired, alive," he paused. "Terrified." "Of what?" "All of it. Staying, building a life, being responsible for someone else's happiness, failing at it." Elena took his hand, threading their fingers together. "You know what terrifies me? That you'll convince yourself you're not good enough and leave before we even try. That fear will make the decision instead of love." "I said I'd stay." "I know, but saying and doing are different things. I need to know you mean it, that when things get hard, and they will get hard, you won't disappear because running feels safer than fighting." Caleb looked at their joined hands, at the physical proof of connection he'd avoided for so long. "I can't promise I won't be scared. Can't promise I'll always know what to do or make the right choices. But I promise I'll try. I'll stay and try, even when every instinct tells me to run. That's all I'm asking." They sat together in morning sunshine, watching Missoula wake up around them. The settlement hummed with activity, hammers ringing as buildings took shape, children's voices carrying from the street, the constant motion of people building futures one day at a time. I need to find work, Caleb said eventually. Can't just live off charity while you're teaching. What kind of work are you thinking? Not sure yet. I know horses, know the territory, know how to track and hunt and survive. That's got to be worth something. Jonas Fletcher mentioned they need someone to coordinate security, patrol the perimeter, train volunteers, respond to threats. He asked if you might be interested. Caleb considered it. The work would use his skills without requiring him to leave for long periods. Would let him stay close, build roots, contribute something meaningful. It felt right in a way scouting never had. Protection instead of search. Prevention instead of rescue. I could do that, he said. Yeah, I could do that. Elena squeezed his hand. Then talk to Fletcher, see what he's offering. We'll figure out the rest as we go. The conversation with Jonas Fletcher happened that afternoon. The settlement leader laid out the position with typical directness. Organize patrols, establish watch rotations, train citizens in basic defense, coordinate responses to threats whether from weather or wildlife, or the occasional troublemaker passing through. It's not glamorous work, Fletcher warned. Mostly it's boring. Walking the same routes, checking the same spots, preparing for emergencies that hopefully never come. But boring's what keeps people safe. Boring's what lets families sleep at night knowing someone's watching. I can do boring. Done enough excitement for a lifetime. The pay's modest but steady. Room and board included if you need it, though I hear you've got other arrangements in mind. Fletcher's expression suggested the entire settlement knew about Caleb and Elena, which was both embarrassing and oddly comforting. Word travels fast. Small community, people talk. Mostly they're happy for you both. Miss Ward's already made an impression, and you saved Tommy Patterson's life. That buys goodwill that'll last years. Caleb shifted uncomfortably. I was just doing what needed doing. Maybe, but not everyone would have gone into that creek. Not everyone would have held on when the current hit. You did, and that matters to people here. Fletcher extended his hand. So what do you say? You want the job? Caleb shook without hesitation. Yeah, I want it. Good. Start Monday. I'll introduce you to the current volunteers, show you the patrol routes, get you settled. Welcome to Missoula, Monroe. Officially. Walking back toward the schoolhouse, Caleb felt something unfamiliar settling in his chest. Not quite peace, but maybe the beginning of it. A sense that he was moving in the right direction, that the choices he was making led somewhere worth going. Elena was teaching when he arrived. A dozen children of varying ages arranged on benches, watching her write on a slate board with rapt attention. He paused in the doorway, not wanting to interrupt, content to just watch her work. She moved through the lesson with natural authority, making arithmetic engaging through practical applications the frontier children could understand. How many pounds of flour for a week? How much water per person per day? If you travel 15 miles at 3 miles per hour, when do you arrive? When she dismissed them for the day, the children filed out with the chaotic energy of young things freed from confinement. Several waved at Caleb as they passed, and one brave girl, maybe 8 years old, stopped to address him directly. You're the man who saved Tommy. I helped save Tommy. Miss Ward was there too. She says you were very brave, that you didn't let go even when the water tried to take you. Caleb felt his throat tighten unexpectedly. Sometimes holding on is all you can do. The girl nodded seriously, then ran to catch up with her friends. Elena joined him in the doorway, slipping her arm through his with easy affection. They adore you, she said. Half of them want to be scouts now because of you. I'm not a scout anymore. Fletcher gave me the security job. I start Monday. Elena's smile could have lit the whole valley. That's wonderful. You'll be perfect for it. You sound very certain. I am. You're observant, careful, good in crisis. Exactly what this settlement needs. She paused, then added more quietly. And it means you'll be here. Permanently here, not just passing through. Yeah, permanently here. They stood together watching the sun sink toward the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The kind of sunset that made you believe in beauty despite everything the world could throw at you. Caleb, Elena said after a while, her voice carrying a weight that made him look at her directly. I need to tell you something. His stomach tightened with instinctive worry. What? I got a letter today From my brother. The words landed like stones. Her brother, the one she'd come west searching for, the one who'd disappeared into the territory without word. The reason she'd joined the wagon train in the first place. What did it say? He's in Helena, been working at a mining operation for the past year. He apologized for not writing sooner, explained he'd been moving around too much to receive mail reliably. He wants to see me. She paused, watching Caleb's face. He's offering me land. A section near Helena that he's claimed but can't work himself. Says if I want it, it's mine. Caleb felt something cold settle in his chest. Land. A future. Everything Elena had come west seeking, now offered by the family she'd been searching for. And Helena was 300 miles north, too far to commute, too far to maintain what they'd just started building. That's good, he managed to say. That's what you wanted. To find him. Get the future you were after. It was what I wanted. Before. Elena turned to face him fully, taking both his hands. Before Missoula. Before the school. Before you. You can't pass this up because of me. It's land, Elena. Your own land. Security, family, everything you've been working toward. Or I could stay here, keep teaching, build a life with you, create something that matters in a different way. But your brother is important to me. Of course he is. But he's offering land, not requiring my presence. I could visit, maintain the relationship without uprooting everything I've started here. She squeezed his hands. Unless you think I should go, unless this is your exit, the convenient reason to back away from what we said. Caleb felt the accusation like a slap, mostly because part of him had immediately jumped to exactly that conclusion. Here was the out, the reason to let her leave without having to be the one who failed. Clean, simple, no one's fault. But looking at her, at the hope and fear warring in her expression, at the woman who'd become essential to him in ways he was only beginning to understand, he couldn't do it. Couldn't take the coward's path, couldn't choose safety over truth. I don't want you to go, he said, the words raw but honest. I want you to stay. Build this life we're starting, see what we can make together. But I also can't be the reason you give up what you came here for. That's not fair to either of us. Then come with me, to Helena. We could claim the land together, build something there instead of here. I just took the security job, made commitments to Fletcher, to the settlement. I can't walk away from that after one day. So we're stuck. You won't come north. I won't leave you behind. What do we do? The question hung between them, heavy with implications. This was the test, the first real obstacle to what they'd declared just yesterday. And already it felt insurmountable, like the universe was confirming Caleb's worst fears about trying to build anything permanent. I don't know, he admitted. I don't know what we do. Elena pulled her hands free, turning away to stare at the mountains. When she spoke, her voice carried a brittleness he'd never heard before. My whole life, I've had to choose between what I want and what's practical, between family and future, between security and dreams. I thought maybe this time would be different, that maybe I'd found something where I didn't have to choose. Elena, no, let me finish. I love you. I meant what I said. But I also can't keep sacrificing everything for other people's comfort. I did that with my parents, with my brother, with everyone who needed me to be smaller so they could be bigger. I won't do it anymore. Not even for you. The words stung because they were fair. She was right. He was asking her to give up land and family so he wouldn't have to face his fear of starting over somewhere new. Asking her to be the one who compromised while he stayed safe in the choice he'd already made. You're right, he said quietly. That's not fair. I'm sorry. She looked at him, surprise flickering through the hurt. What? You're right. I'm asking you to sacrifice for my comfort, and that's not okay. If Helena's where you need to go, then we figure out how to make that work, together. You'd leave Missoula? After everything you just said about staying? I said I'd stay with you. Didn't specify geography. Caleb moved to stand beside her, looking out at the same mountains. The staying part that matters isn't the place. It's the person. It's choosing you every day, wherever that leads, even when it's scary. Especially when it's scary. Elena's eyes filled with tears. You mean that? I do. Talk to Fletcher tomorrow. Explain the situation. Maybe he can find someone else for security, or maybe I work for the settlement until we're ready to leave. But we go together, to Helena or anywhere else. That's what matters. She turned into his arms, holding him tight enough that he could feel her trembling. I don't want to leave. I like it here. Like the school, the people, the life we're starting. But that land, it's security, Caleb. Real security. The kind you can build on for decades. Then we think about it. Really think, without rushing. You don't have to answer your brother today. We have time to figure out what's right. How much time? As much as we need. This is too important to decide based on fear or pressure. We decide based on what actually makes sense for both of us. They stood together as darkness settled over the valley, holding each other against uncertainty and the future's vast, unknowable shape. Caleb felt the fear still there, still whispering that attachment led to loss. The caring meant vulnerability. But louder than the fear was Elena's heartbeat against his chest, steady and real and worth every risk. The next week unfolded in careful negotiation with reality. Caleb talked to Fletcher, who proved surprisingly understanding about the situation. Marcus offered perspective from his years of watching people make similar choices. Elena wrote to her brother, asking for time to consider, explaining about the school and the life she was building. They talked late into the nights, weighing options, examining consequences, trying to find the path that honored both their needs. Helena offered land but required leaving the community they'd become part of. Missoula offered stability but meant giving up the security of ownership. There was no perfect answer, just trade-offs that required choosing what mattered most. What if we tried both? Elena suggested one evening. They were sitting in the schoolhouse after hours, papers spread across her desk like evidence of futures being calculated. Keep the land in Helena, but stay here for now. Visit periodically, make sure it's maintained, maybe build something small we can use seasonally. That's a lot of traveling, 300 miles each way, multiple times a year. But it doesn't force us to choose one or the other immediately. Gives us time to see what fits, what feels right long term. Caleb considered it. The solution wasn't elegant, but it was practical, the kind of compromise that let you move forward without burning every bridge behind you. Your brother would be okay with that? Us holding the land but not working it full time? He wants me to have security, not servitude. As long as we maintain the claim and visit regularly, he'll be satisfied. Elena paused, then added carefully, unless you hate the idea. Unless it feels too complicated. Life's complicated regardless. At least this way we're complicating it together. She smiled, relief evident. Together. I like the sound of that. They sent the letter to her brother 2 days later, outlining their proposal. While they waited for his response, life in Missoula continued its steady rhythm. Caleb started his security work, learning the settlement's vulnerabilities and organizing volunteers into an effective watch rotation. Elena's school grew as word spread about her teaching, parents grateful for someone who could give their children education alongside survival skills. And slowly, carefully, they built the small intimacies that turned declaration into relationship. Learning each other's rhythms, negotiating space and closeness, discovering how to fight fair and apologize honestly. It wasn't always easy. Both carried wounds that flared unexpectedly, fears that manifested as withdrawal or defensiveness. But they kept showing up, kept trying, kept choosing each other even when it would have been simpler not to. Marcus watched it all with the satisfaction of someone who'd predicted exactly this outcome. Told you you'd figure it out, he said one afternoon, sharing coffee with Caleb while they reviewed patrol schedules. We're still figuring. This isn't settled yet. Nothing's ever fully settled. That's not the point. Point is, you're trying together instead of running away alone. That's progress. Doesn't feel like progress when I'm still scared every morning that I'll wake up and she'll have changed her mind. That fear probably never goes away completely. You just learn to live with it. Marcus sipped his coffee thoughtfully. You know what the difference is between you now and you 2 months ago? What? 2 months ago, the fear controlled you, made every decision, dictated every choice. Now? Now you're scared, but you're still here, still building, still trying. That's growth, Monroe. That's what courage actually looks like. Caleb wanted to argue, to insist he wasn't courageous, just stubborn. But maybe Marcus was right. Maybe courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the decision to act despite it. To stay when running felt safer, to try when failure felt certain, to love when loss seemed inevitable. Elena's brother wrote back 3 weeks later. His response was warm and encouraging, agreeing to their proposal with the caveat that they visit at least twice a year to maintain the claim legally. He also extended an invitation to come soon, meet him properly, see the land before fully committing. "We should go," Elena said, reading the letter aloud. "Before winter makes travel impossible. See what we're considering, meet my brother, get a sense of whether this plan actually makes sense." "When?" "Soon. Next month, maybe. Give us time to prepare properly, arrange for someone to cover my classes, make sure the settlement's secure before you leave." The trip to Helena became their project, something to plan together, a shared adventure that tested their partnership before making it permanent. They spent evenings mapping routes, calculating supplies, discussing contingencies. Marcus agreed to oversee security in Caleb's absence, and one of the settlement mothers volunteered to supervise Elena's students through substitute lessons she prepared. A week before their planned departure, Caleb found himself sitting outside the boarding house at dawn, coffee in hand, watching the settlement wake up. This place had become familiar in ways he hadn't expected, the faces he recognized, the routines he'd learned, the sense of belonging that came from being part of something larger than himself. "You're brooding again." Elena appeared beside him, already dressed for the day, her hair braided in the practical style she wore for teaching. "Just thinking." About? About how strange it is. 2 months ago, I was convinced staying anywhere was impossible. Now I'm sitting here worried about leaving for a few weeks. Elena sat close, resting her head on his shoulder. "That's not strange. That's normal. You've built something here. Of course, leaving feels hard. What if we get to Helena and I hate it? Or what if you love it and want to stay, but I can't handle starting over again? Then we'll figure it out. Same as we figure everything else out, together, honestly, without letting fear make the decision." She lifted her head to look at him. "Caleb, I need you to understand something. I'm not asking you to be perfect or fearless or always certain. I'm asking you to be present, to stay in the conversation even when it's hard. Can you do that?" He met her eyes, seeing the challenge and the trust equally balanced there. "Yeah, I can do that." "Then stop borrowing trouble from the future. We'll deal with Helena when we get there. Right now, we're here. That's enough." She was right. The future would come whether he worried about it or not. Better to focus on what he could control. His choices today, his commitment to trying, his willingness to stay even when every instinct screamed to run. They left for Helena on a cold October morning, the first snow already dusting the highest peaks. Marcus saw them off with characteristic gruffness, disguising affection, making Caleb promise to return in one piece. "Don't make me come looking for you," Marcus warned. "I'm too old to rescue idiots from their own poor decisions." "We'll be fine." "You better be. I've got money riding on you two making it work." Elena laughed. "You're betting on our relationship?" "Half the settlement's betting on your relationship. You're the favorite success story this winter. Don't disappoint us." They rode north through country that grew progressively wilder and more beautiful. The journey gave them time together away from the settlement's expectations, space to just be without performing stability for an audience. They talked about everything and nothing, childhood memories, hopes for the future, fears that still lingered despite progress made. On the fifth night, camped beneath stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch, Elena asked the question that had been hovering between them since they left. "If we decide Helena's right, if we choose to move there permanently, will you be okay with that? Truly okay, not just agreeing because I want it?" Caleb stared into the fire, considering his answer carefully. "Honestly? I don't know yet. Part of me is terrified of starting over somewhere new, building something that could fail. But another part thinks maybe that's exactly what I need. Not running from the past, but actively choosing a different future. And if it fails? If we try and it doesn't work? Then at least we tried. At least we gave it everything we had." He looked at her across the flames. "I'm learning that failure's not the worst thing. The worst thing is never trying at all." Elena smiled, and in that expression, Caleb saw his own journey reflected back. The slow, painful work of learning to risk, to hope, to believe that tomorrow might be better than yesterday. "When did you get so wise?" she asked. "I'm not wise. I'm just listening to a very smart woman who refuses to let me hide from life." "Good. Keep listening, I have lots more wisdom to share. They reached Helena 2 days later, riding into a settlement noticeably larger than Missoula, more established, more prosperous, with the kind of infrastructure that suggested permanence. Elena's brother met them at the settlement edge, and the reunion was everything Caleb expected: tears and laughter, and the complicated joy of family rediscovered. David Ward was older than Elena by a decade, weathered by hard work, but carrying the same determination Caleb recognized in his sister. He welcomed Caleb with surprising warmth, shaking his hand firmly. "So you're the man who saved my sister's life." "She saved her own life? I just helped her get somewhere safe." "That's not how she tells it. According to her letters, you're the reason she made it through the mountains and found purpose in Missoula." Caleb felt uncomfortable with the praise, but Elena squeezed his hand, grounding him. "We helped each other," she said simply. "That's how it works." David showed them the land over the next 2 days, a section of rolling grassland bordered by pine forest, with a creek running through it and views that stretched for miles. It was beautiful country, raw and untamed, full of potential for anyone brave enough to work it. Standing on a small rise, looking out over land that could be theirs, Caleb felt something shift in his chest. Not fear this time, but possibility. He could see it: a house built near the creek, fields cleared and planted, horses grazing in the distance. A life built from scratch, shaped by their own hands, growing into something that mattered. "What do you think?" Elena asked, watching his face. "I think it's beautiful. I think it could be amazing. But I also think Missoula has a claim on us. The school you started, the community we're part of, the commitments we made. Walking away from that feels wrong." David, who'd been listening quietly, spoke up. "Doesn't have to be walking away. Could be expanding. Keep the school running until you find a replacement. Visit regularly. Build this place slowly while maintaining your connection there. Not everything has to be all or nothing." Caleb looked at Elena's brother with new appreciation. "You've given this some thought." "I've watched my sister chase dreams her whole life. Learned that the best ones don't force you to give up everything else. They add to what you already have." David smiled. "Besides, I'd rather have her visit regularly than move here and resent me for making her choose." That night, lying in bedrolls under the stars with David asleep by the fire, Elena whispered into darkness, "We could do it. Both places, both lives. It wouldn't be easy, but it could work." Caleb pulled her closer, feeling her warmth against the cold night air. "Is that what you want?" "I want you. Everything else is just logistics." "That's not an answer." "Yes, it is. As long as we're together, the rest is details we can figure out. So what do you say, Monroe? Ready to build something that lasts?" Caleb thought about Kansas, about the life he'd built and lost there. Thought about the 2 years he'd spent running from anything that mattered. Thought about Elena, fierce and stubborn, and offering him something he'd thought was gone forever. The chance to build again, to believe again, to love without reservation. "Yeah," he said into the darkness. "I'm ready." They returned to Missoula 3 weeks later with a plan that felt both terrifying and right. The land in Helena was theirs. David had filed the claim in their names, giving them security while they figured out the rest. But Missoula remained home for now, the place where they'd build their foundation before expanding outward. The settlement welcomed them back with surprising enthusiasm. Caleb had expected indifference, maybe mild curiosity about their absence. Instead, people stopped them on the street to ask about the journey, about Helena, about their plans. It was the kind of attention that would have made him bolt 2 months ago. Now it just felt like belonging. "They care about you," Elena said one evening as they walked toward the schoolhouse after yet another conversation with curious neighbors. "About us. We matter to them." "That's still strange to me. Mattering." "Better get used to it. You're stuck with it now." The school had continued smoothly in Elena's absence, but her students celebrated her return with the chaotic joy of children who'd missed someone important. They crowded around her, talking over each other, showing her work they'd completed, asking when they could start real lessons again. Watching her with them, patient and warm and entirely in her element, Caleb felt something settle in his chest. This was what she was meant to do. Teaching wasn't just work for Elena. It was purpose, calling, the thing that made her whole. Whatever they built in Helena would need to accommodate that truth. Winter descended on Montana with the sudden finality of a door slamming shut. Snow came early and heavy, burying the valley in white that would last until spring. Travel became difficult, then impossible, effectively trapping everyone in place until the thaw. It was the kind of forced stillness that would have driven Caleb mad 2 years ago. Now it just gave him time to build. He and Marcus spent long days improving the settlement's defenses, reinforcing structures against heavy snow, establishing protocols for emergencies, training volunteers in winter survival techniques. Jonas Fletcher proved to be excellent at organizing community efforts, turning individual skills into collective capability. "You've made a real difference here," Fletcher told Caleb one afternoon as they inspected the patrol routes. "People feel safer, sleep better knowing someone competent is watching." "Just doing the job." "It's more than that. You care about this place, about these people. That shows in the work." Caleb wanted to deflect the compliment, claim it was just professionalism, just following through on commitments made. But the truth was, Fletcher was right. He did care. Somewhere between arriving as a scout and staying as security, Missoula had stopped being just another settlement and started being home. The real surprise came in January, during the darkest, coldest stretch when cabin fever ran high and tempers ran short. Caleb and Elena were sitting by the fire in the schoolhouse, her grading papers, him cleaning his rifle, when she set down her pen and spoke with deliberate casualness. "I've been thinking about something." "What?" "Marriage." The word landed like a gunshot in the quiet room. Caleb's hand stilled on the rifle, heart suddenly hammering against his ribs. "Marriage." "Don't sound so terrified. It's just a word." "It's not just a word. It's a promise. A permanent one." Elena set aside her papers and turned to face him fully. "I know what it is, and I know it scares you. But we've been dancing around this since Helena. Since before Helena, really. At some point, we need to decide if we're building something permanent or just delaying the inevitable." "What inevitable?" "The choice. Commit fully or walk away. There's no middle ground forever, Caleb. Eventually, you have to decide." He set down the rifle, buying time to organize thoughts that felt scattered and sharp. "You're asking me to marry you?" "I'm saying we should talk about it. Really talk, not just hint around the edges and hope it resolves itself." "Why now? Why in the middle of winter when we're trapped here and can't go anywhere?" "Because winter forces honesty. Because we've got time and privacy and no excuses for avoiding hard conversations." She paused, then added more gently, "And because I love you. Because I want to build a life with you that's official and permanent and not dependent on temporary arrangements." Caleb stood, needing movement, walking to the window to stare out at snow-covered darkness. "I was married before. I built something permanent, and when it ended, it destroyed me. Took 2 years just to learn how to breathe normally again." "I know. You've told me about Sarah, about Kansas, about what you lost. But Caleb, that's not going to happen again." "You can't promise that. Nobody can promise that." "You're right. I can't promise we'll both live to old age without tragedy. Can't promise nothing bad will ever happen. But I can promise that whatever comes, we'll face it together. That you won't be alone in it again." He turned to look at her, this woman who'd somehow seen past every defense and insisted on loving him anyway. "What if I'm not enough? What if I fail you the way I failed Sarah?" Elena stood and crossed to him, taking his face in her hands with firm gentleness. "Listen to me very carefully. You didn't fail Sarah. You made a normal choice that had terrible consequences beyond your control. That's not failure. That's tragedy. And punishing yourself forever doesn't change what happened or honor her memory. She'd want you to be happy, to build something new, to live fully instead of just surviving. You know that's true." Caleb felt tears burning behind his eyes, grief and guilt, and the terrible weight of permission he'd never given himself. "I don't know how to let go of the guilt." "You don't have to let go completely. You just have to make room for something else alongside it. Make room for happiness, for hope, for a future that doesn't require you to forget the past." "What if I can't?" "Then we'll work on it together. One day at a time, one choice at a time, until it gets easier." She paused, eyes searching his. "But I need to know you want to try. I need to know this isn't just temporary for you, that you're not staying because it's easier than leaving, but because you actually want to build something with me. The question hung between them, demanding honesty that felt like stepping off a cliff. Caleb could feel the old fear rising, the instinct to hedge, to qualify, to leave himself an escape route just in case. But looking at Elena, at the vulnerability and strength equally balanced in her expression, he knew that hedging wasn't enough anymore. She deserved certainty, and he deserved to give it. "I want to marry you," he said, the words coming out rough but clear. "I want to build a life that's permanent and official and has your name legally attached to mine. I want to wake up every morning knowing we chose each other deliberately, not just out of convenience or fear of being alone." Elena's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Was that a proposal?" "I think it was. Wasn't very romantic, was it?" "It was perfect. It was honest and scared and exactly what I needed to hear." She kissed him then, fierce and joyful and tasting like salt from tears they were both crying now. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, Caleb felt lighter than he had in years. Like he'd been carrying a weight so long he'd forgotten it was there, and someone had just lifted it free. "So, we're doing this?" he asked. "Actually, doing this?" "We're doing this." "When?" Elena laughed, bright and free. "How about spring? Give us time to plan properly. Let the weather clear so people can travel if they want to attend. Nothing fancy, just us and whoever wants to celebrate with us." "Spring works. Spring's good," they told Marcus the next morning. He listened to their announcement with the poker face he'd perfected over years of scouting, then broke into a grin that transformed his weathered features. "About damn time. I was starting to think I'd have to lock you two in a room until you figured it out." "You knew we'd get here?" Helena asked. "I knew Monroe would get here eventually. Man's stubborn, but not stupid. Just took him a while to realize running wasn't working anymore." Caleb accepted the teasing without protest, too content to care about being ribbed for his previous reluctance. "We're thinking spring. Simple ceremony, nothing elaborate." "Good. Elaborate's a waste of time and money. You want me to stand up with you?" The question caught Caleb off guard. Not the offer itself, but the sudden tightness in his throat at accepting it. Marcus had pulled him out of grief, given him purpose, stuck with him through 2 years of defensive silence. Of course he wanted Marcus there. "Yeah, I'd like that." "Then consider it done. I'll even try to find clothes that aren't covered in trail dust." Word spread through the settlement with the speed of wildfire. By evening, half the town knew about the engagement, and by the next day, everyone knew. People stopped them constantly to offer congratulations, share advice, volunteer help with preparations. Mrs. Patterson insisted on making Elena's dress. Fletcher offered the community hall for the ceremony. Even the children got involved, planning decorations with the serious enthusiasm of people given important work. The attention was overwhelming at first, but Elena navigated it with grace, accepting help while maintaining boundaries. "It's sweet," she told Caleb one night. "They're excited for us. Let them be part of it. I'm not good at this. Being the center of attention. You're doing fine. Just smile and say thank you. That's all anyone expects." Winter continued its slow crawl toward spring, and with it came the work of planning a future. They spent evenings discussing logistics, where to live initially, how to balance work between Missoula and Helena, when to make the transition from temporary to permanent. Nothing was certain yet, but the uncertainty felt manageable now, shared between them instead of carried alone. In late February, Elena received another letter from her brother. David wrote that he'd begun preliminary work on the Helena property, clearing land, marking boundaries, establishing the claim more formally. He'd also extended an offer that shifted everything. "He wants to partner with us," Elena said, reading the letter aloud. "Says if we're serious about the land, he'll help us build a house this summer. He's got connections to a timber crew, knows builders who work cheap. We could have a real structure by fall." Caleb felt the familiar tug between fear and possibility. A house meant commitment beyond words, meant putting down roots that would be hard to tear up later. But it also meant security, permanence, the kind of foundation you could build a life on. "What do you think?" he asked, turning the question back to her. "I think it's an incredible opportunity. I think having a home of our own, something we build together. That's what we've been working toward." She paused, watching his face. "But only if you're ready. only if it feels right and not forced. I'm ready. And saying it aloud, Caleb realized it was true. The fear was still there, probably always would be, but it didn't control him anymore, didn't make his decisions or dictate his future. They wrote back to David that week, accepting his offer and proposing a timeline. They'd marry in April, spend the summer building in Helena while maintaining Elena's teaching commitment in Missoula through fall. Come winter, they'd reassess, decide whether to move permanently or continue splitting time between locations. The plan felt solid, flexible enough to adapt, but structured enough to work toward. Most importantly, it was theirs, built together through honest conversation and mutual compromise. March brought the first hints of thaw. Snow melted in patches, revealing earth that had been buried for months. The settlement emerged from winter's grip with the grateful relief of people who'd survived another season. And with the warming weather came preparations for the wedding. Mrs. Patterson worked on Elena's dress in secret, only allowing brief fittings where Elena stood still while being measured and pinned. "Trust me," the older woman kept saying. "It'll be perfect." Marcus helped Caleb find clothes appropriate for a ceremony. Not fancy, but clean and new and fitting the occasion. "You clean up all right when you try," Marcus observed. "Elena's a lucky woman." "I'm the lucky one." "You're both lucky. That's how it's supposed to work." The week before the wedding, Jonas Fletcher pulled Caleb aside after a security meeting. "I wanted to talk to you about something, about your position here." Caleb felt his stomach tighten. "If this is about the summer, it's not." "Well, it is, but not the way you're thinking." Fletcher paused, choosing words carefully. "You've built something important here. The security protocols, the training, the way people trust you. I don't want to lose that just because you're expanding to Helena." "I'm not sure how to maintain both. The travel alone, what if you didn't have to? What if we structured it differently? You spend summers in Helena building your place, winters here maintaining security when travel's difficult anyway. Train a deputy who can handle things in your absence, someone you trust to follow the systems you've established." Caleb considered it. The proposal solved the problem he'd been wrestling with: how to honor commitments in both places without being constantly torn between them. "You have someone in mind for deputy?" "Young man named Thomas Creek, Salish heritage, knows the territory better than anyone, served as Army Scout for 3 years. He's looking for steady work, and I think he'd be perfect. You'd train him, teach him your systems, then trust him to maintain them while you're gone." "That could work?" "Yeah, that could actually work." Fletcher smiled with visible relief. "Good. I'll introduce you two after the wedding. Let you get settled into married life before adding new complications." The conversation shifted something fundamental in Caleb's thinking. He'd been viewing Missoula and Helena as competing priorities, forcing him to choose between them. But Fletcher's proposal suggested a different model: integration rather than competition, building systems that allowed both places to thrive without requiring his constant presence. He shared the idea with Elena that evening. She listened with growing excitement, already seeing possibilities. "We could make it work. Summers in Helena building the homestead, winters here maintaining the school and security. The children need consistency during the school year anyway. This way, I'm not abandoning them mid-term. And we'd still be together. That's the important part. Always together, that's the promise." April arrived with explosive color. Wildflowers carpeting the valley in yellow and purple, trees budding green, the whole world waking from winter's sleep. The settlement buzzed with wedding preparations, everyone contributing something to the celebration. The night before the ceremony, Caleb found himself unable to sleep. He stood outside the boarding house in pre-dawn darkness, watching stars fade as the sky lightened. Tomorrow, he'd marry Elena Ward. Tomorrow, he'd make promises he'd thought impossible 2 years ago. Tomorrow, he'd choose permanence over running, connection over safety, love over fear. "Can't sleep either?" Elena's voice came soft from beside him. She'd appeared silently, wrapped in a shawl against the cool air. "Thought you were supposed to be at the Fletcher's place. Bad luck to see each other before the wedding." "That's superstition, and I make my own luck." She moved close, fitting herself against his side. "Are you nervous?" "Terrified." "Good, me too." "Me?" They stood together watching the sky shift from black to gray to pink to gold. the sun rising over mountains that had witnessed harder things and would witness harder things still. But today, just for today, the world felt gentle, full of possibility and promise, and the fragile hope that maybe tomorrow could be better than yesterday. No regrets? Elena asked quietly. None. You? Not one. The ceremony happened at noon in the community hall with what seemed like the entire settlement crammed inside. Elena walked in on her brother's arm, wearing a dress that made Caleb's breath catch, simple and elegant, perfectly suited to her. She moved toward him with steady confidence, eyes locked on his, and when she reached him, she took his hands without hesitation. The words were standard, promises spoken countless times by countless couples building lives in hard country. But saying them aloud, hearing Elena say them back, made them new, made them specific and real and binding in ways that went beyond legal ceremony. I, Caleb Monroe, take you, Elena Ward, to be my wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until death do us part. I, Elena Ward, take you, Caleb Monroe, to be my husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better or worse, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish until death do us part. The minister pronounced them married, and when Caleb kissed his wife, the room erupted in cheers and applause. Marcus was grinning like a fool. David looked emotional in the way older brothers do when their sisters find happiness. The Patterson family was crying openly. The celebration lasted into evening, food and music and dancing, stories shared and toasts raised, the whole community coming together to mark the occasion. Caleb found himself pulled into conversations, welcomed into circles, treated like he belonged in ways that would have terrified him months ago. But the best moment came late, when the crowd had thinned and he and Elena slipped outside for air. They stood together under stars that blazed across the Montana sky, wearing rings that caught moonlight, carrying the weight and joy of promises made. We did it, Elena said, wonder in her voice. We actually did it. Did you doubt we would? Sometimes. When you'd get that look like you were measuring the distance to the door, calculating escape routes, I'd wonder if this was real or just temporary. Caleb turned to face her fully, taking both her hands. It's real. This is real. You're my wife, and I'm your husband, and that's not temporary or conditional or dependent on anything except us choosing each other every single day. Promise? Promise. She kissed him, and in that kiss Caleb felt everything they'd survived to reach this moment. The mountains and storms, the fear and hope, the slow, painful work of learning to trust again. They'd both come west searching for something, found each other instead, built something better than what they'd lost. Summer arrived with its familiar intensity, and with it came the work of building. They traveled to Helena in May, joining David and his crew to raise the house that would be theirs. The work was hard, long days of physical labor under sun that seemed designed to test endurance. But there was satisfaction in it too, watching walls rise from nothing, seeing structure take shape through collective effort. Elena worked alongside the men, refusing to be relegated to support roles. She learned to swing a hammer properly, to read measurements, to problem solve when plans met reality. Caleb watched her grow stronger and more confident, claiming this space is truly theirs.
"This is good," she said one evening as they sat on the partially completed porch, muscles aching, hands blistered. "Hard, but good." "Yeah, it is." "Do you ever think about Kansas, about what you built there?" Caleb considered the question honestly. "Sometimes. But it doesn't hurt the way it used to. It's just part of the story now, what came before this. Before you. Sarah would approve of her, I think, of us. I think so too." They finished the house by August. A simple structure but solid, built to withstand Montana winters and summer heat. It had 2 rooms initially with space to expand, a porch facing east to catch morning sun, windows positioned to maximize light. Nothing fancy, but it was theirs in ways that went beyond ownership. Standing in the completed house, looking at empty rooms waiting to be filled with life, Caleb felt a peace he'd thought impossible. This wasn't Kansas. Wasn't a replacement for what he'd lost.
It was something new entirely, built with different hands, for different purposes, carrying different meanings.
"What do you think?" Elena asked, watching his face. "I think we built something that'll last." "The house?" "The house, the marriage, the life we're creating, all of it." She smiled, and in her expression Caleb saw their whole journey reflected, from mountains and survival to this moment of completion. "Then let's fill it, make it a home." They returned to Missoula in September, keeping their promise to Elena's students and the community that had welcomed them. The school year started with Elena energized by summer's work, bringing new confidence to her teaching. Caleb resumed security duties while training Thomas Creek, the deputy Fletcher had mentioned. Thomas proved to be everything promised, capable and trustworthy, learning quickly and asking smart questions. By October, Caleb felt confident leaving him in charge for extended periods, knowing the settlement would be well protected. Winter arrived again, but this time it felt different. They weren't trapped anymore. They were choosing to be here, honoring commitments while maintaining the life they'd built elsewhere. It was complicated logistics, constant balancing, the kind of arrangement that required communication and compromise. But it worked, because they made it work, together. On a cold December evening, exactly 1 year after the night Elena had asked about marriage, they sat by the fire in the schoolhouse. Snow fell outside, coating the world in white silence. Elena was grading papers. Caleb was cleaning his rifle. The domesticity of it would have seemed impossible a year ago. "You know what I realized today?" Elena said, setting down her pen. "What?" "We made it. Through the hard parts, through the uncertainty, through all the reasons we could have failed. We made it to the other side." Caleb looked at his wife, this woman who'd refused to let him hide, who'd insisted on loving him despite every reason not to, who'd built a life with him one choice at a time. "Yeah, we did." "Are you happy?" The question deserved an honest answer. Caleb thought about Kansas and loss, about 2 years spent running, about the mountains where they'd found each other. Thought about the house in Helena and the school in Missoula and the complicated, beautiful life they'd created. "Yeah," he said, and meant it completely. "I'm happy." "Good. Me too." Spring came again, as it always did, melting snow and revealing the world underneath. They prepared for another summer in Helena, another building season, another chapter in the life they were writing together. But before they left, Caleb did something he hadn't done in 3 years. He wrote a letter. It was addressed to Sarah's family in Kansas, people he hadn't contacted since her death, people who probably thought he was dead too, or lost to grief. He told them about Montana, about Elena, about the life he'd built from the wreckage of what he'd lost. He told them Sarah would always matter, would always be part of his story, but that he'd found a way to keep living anyway. He didn't know if they'd respond, didn't need them to. The letter was for him, a way of closing one chapter while honoring what it had meant. When he and Elena rode out of Missoula in April, heading north toward Helena and another summer's work, Caleb looked back once. The settlement spread below them, smoke rising from chimneys, people moving through their days, the school standing empty until fall. This was home. Not the only home anymore, but home nonetheless. "What are you thinking?" Elena asked, noticing his backward glance. "I'm thinking about how far we've come. From that creek where we found you to here. From survival to this." "Any regrets?" Caleb looked at his wife, her face turned toward the future, her hand steady on the reins, her whole being pointed toward tomorrow with the confidence of someone who'd learned that hard things could be survived and happiness could be chosen. "Not one," he said. "Not a single one." They rode north together toward mountains that still stood wild and unforgiving, toward land that was theirs, toward a future they'd build with their own hands. The wagon train Elena had traveled with was still gone, still lost to tragedy and time. But from that loss had come something unexpected, a connection forged in wilderness, a love built on honesty and effort, a life that proved survival wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. The journey didn't end that spring morning. It transformed into something else entirely, not a search or a rescue or a desperate flight from pain, but a deliberate choice to move forward together.
to face whatever came next, not as isolated individuals protecting themselves from attachment, but as partners who'd learned that connection was worth the risk. Years would pass. The house in Helena would grow. Additional rooms added as children came, as family expanded, as life required more space. The school in Missoula would thrive under Elena's continued guidance, producing generations of educated children ready to build futures in hard country. The settlement would grow into a town, then a city, carrying forward the work of people who'd refused to quit. But those were details, footnotes to the real story. The real story was simpler and more profound. Two broken people found each other in wilderness and chose to heal together, chose to build instead of run, chose love over fear and hope over despair, and tomorrow over yesterday. That was the story that mattered. That was the journey that finally began.